we don't use the internet, only the devil will use the internet.
All right, good afternoon. This week I have the pleasure of being joined by Shayne Swenson, who is an Orthodox Christian iconographer hailing from Washington State. Shayne, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
Yeah, not a problem. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. It's my pleasure. I'm a big fan of the work that I've found of yours. I don't know if your Twitter exists anymore, but I found you on Instagram, and I really like following your work and checking out your iconography.
Thanks. Yeah, I had a Twitter that for like 2 or 3 months, and it was actually pretty fun. You know, I had a little bit of momentum on it too, which was pretty interesting. But then after spending time on it when the war and stuff broke out, I had to get off there. It was too stressful, and yeah, people are pretty toxic, so it wasn't good for me personally. So I nuked my Twitter. So
yeah, probably not a bad idea. It can be pretty bad. Too much social media.
Oh yeah.
Right on. Well, man, I really I'd love it if you would just give us like a little bit of who you are, since you're quite more of a figure than simply an iconographer from your biography. So would you mind, for my audience, just giving a little bit of a introduction for yourself?
Yeah. When you do that, you always kind of sound self-indulgent, but I'll give it a whirl. Yeah, as you said, my name's Shayne. I'm an iconographer and an artist. I've also been a tattoo artist for almost 20 years. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I'm a German Shepherd owner, an Orthodox Christian. But I guess first and foremost, I would if I had to claim like a tribe or a label, that would obviously it would be I'm an Orthodox Christian, and then a dad and a husband, the usual things people say on podcasts like this to sound moral and like their priorities are in the right place. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't have like a very I did a podcast a while back with somebody who asked me to kind of go into my people like to do their conversion stories, and mine really isn't too dramatic. I didn't spend years on Skid Row or anything like that. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it was boring. Being a tattoo artist, it's not necessarily the most boring job. It's probably not as exciting as people on the outside looking in think it is. It's a job just like anything else, but yeah, I've definitely had my share of interesting adventures and experiences, but all in all, I'm a pretty vanilla guy outside of what you would see on the internet. So
yeah, that's funny. I dabbled in the tattoo world maybe like 2006-ish. I don't even know how long ago that was, but it was definitely not for me. Even in my most hedonistic kind of crazy days, I try to stay away from hard drugs. I try to stay away from anything that was too underworld related, and for whatever reason, that just seems to line up. And I remember one time when I was an apprentice, this girl was strung out on something. She'd broken into the tattoo parlor that I was working at, and she was asleep in the bathtub because it was like a converted apartment, so it had a whole bathroom in the back and everything. And she was just asleep in there, and I'm like, okay, I think this world might not. This is not giving me a good a good look into the world. So I didn't last for me. But
no, many such cases. I've worked in a lot of different tattoo shops and studios or whatever you want to call it, and yeah, there's a range of kind of, for lack of a better term, there's some like super white trash places, and then there's like really upscale, high end places. Especially now the industry, like I said earlier, I've been doing it almost 20 years, and the industry is light years away from what it was when I first started. It's interesting because I can now, I was talking to another friend of mine he's been tattooing quite a bit longer than I have even, and you know, we were talking, and I said I can finally call myself an old guy. Like the place that I tattoo at now, we have a couple apprentices, and yeah, just talking to them about things. I find myself bringing up quips and things that I heard when I was just starting out that, you know, you don't really realize how true they are. Little tattooisms that you don't really realize are true in a, you know, experiential way until you actually, you know, live through those years as a tattooer. But yeah, as far as the tattoo industry being degenerate, it definitely can be. It is changing a lot. It's attracting a lot of people. Over the last 10 years, I would say it's attracted a lot more normal people who just want to make a living in art without having to be a freelance artist or play that whole game. It's kind of more of a sure thing, I guess you could say, for that when it comes to that. But yeah, I mean, I don't make any secret about my past drug use or anything, you know, and I wouldn't say it necessarily has to do with tattooing, but being a tattooer, I mean, if the experience you had, you know, it's very easy, at least back then when I was doing that sort of thing, it was very easy to acquire illegal substances. You know, when you're in that, I'm not an evangelist for tattooing, and I get a lot of grief from a certain, you know, facet of the Orthodox world for being a tattoo artist. You know, it just comes to the territory. So I kind of keep my iconography vocation and tattooing separate. With the, you know, the goal is to transition out of tattooing. It's easier said than done, though, when you've been on that career path for 20 years. But like I said, I'm not an evangelist for tattooing. I don't defend tattooing. That's something I'm agnostic about. That's a personal thing that people, you know, a choice people can make about their own body and where they're at spiritually or whatever. But I also don't want to denigrate it because it's given me a lot of great things. And tattooing in and of itself, I think people who don't tattoo or who don't have a lot of tattoos, and I've seen this personally through being Orthodox, you know, maybe not in a while, maybe not in like, you know, the last, you know, 8 or 9 years, I guess you could say. I haven't really experienced any of the, you know, people like to be a martyr if they have tattoos, like I'm being oppressed for my tattoos, like that was a thing, you know. That people like to, I don't want to be judged. It's like, well, don't draw skulls on your face. You know, permanently, then maybe people wouldn't think you were a weirdo. I don't know. It just kind of comes to territory if you get your neck and face and hands tattooed. You know, people are going to think you're a creep. So just deal with it. But it's different now. People don't really do that. I remember when I'd first gotten my neck tattooed 16 years ago. It wasn't, I mean, even over in like the Seattle areas where I lived at the time, not a lot of people had their neck and hands tattooed, you know. I mean, I see, I mean, obviously you have tattoos, so I don't know when you got that stuff done, but it was definitely like when I got my neck tattoo, it was when Good Charlotte was really popular. So, I mean, it was definitely the hot thing to do, but people didn't really commit to doing it then to that degree. And yeah, so I mean, it would still give you some kind of a bad boy mystique or whatever, but at the end of the day, it's just become so commonplace that, I mean, my clientele is mostly, you know, the place I tattoo at now, we're in like this building downtown with like attorneys and accountants all around us, and it's very, I don't want to sound pretentious and say it's very upper class, but it's just very normal, you know, normal people maybe don't have like heroin addicts wanting to get swastikas on their face, or, you know, like that kind of thing. I don't want to get your YouTube channel banned for saying that word, but you know what I mean. You have some experience with it. But yeah, it's tattooing is what it is. I appreciate it for what it's given me, and I will never say a bad thing about it. But if you want to get a tattoo, don't email me asking me if it's moral, because I'm gonna pass the buck. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a good point. You know, I've had my hands tattooed for a really long time, and that never really got anyone's eyebrows up, even though, you know, we're talking like, you know, mid 2000s, I suppose, when I got that done. But it was the neck tattoos. That's what actually started, you know, because they're so, it's right there. It's right next to your face. You know, people see them. So that's actually what kind of got people giving me some interesting looks. But
Yeah.
you know, it was like 10 years ago when I got these things done, and I don't know if I'd do it again, you know.
Exactly.
Probably not, probably not,
Yeah.
but I was a very different person then. So
Like I said earlier, I mean, I tell my kids this too. You know, you when I said earlier about the things that all the old guys told me when I was an apprentice or just starting out, it's totally true. Like if I could go back and do it again, I mean, I have tons of tattoos all over me, and most of them are garbage, just because I haven't worked with, you know, now I work with really great, you know, world-class tattooers, but for a long time I didn't, you know. And so you're slow, or you're bored, and your buddy you work with is like, hey, I drew this, you want to get it tattooed? And you know, why not? You're around it all. So cool. So I have a bunch of garbage tattoos. I have some good ones, but most of them are garbage tattoos. And but yeah, as far as neck and hands and stuff go, like I tell my kids, don't get tattooed. Wait till you're at least 25. Like, don't go out and get your face tattooed. I did that, and you know, I've gone through lots of laser lightning, laser removal. Even I had a big Rock of Ages cross right here that's gone now, luckily. But I had that done, laser removal, which is like being the best way I can describe it, it's like being whipped with a soldering iron, like over and over, like really quickly. It's pretty brutal. But yeah, I would never get my hands or neck or anything visible tattooed. And it's because I'm going to be 41 in a couple of weeks. I don't like going into a store and having people. I don't like standing out anymore. Like when I was 20 and I wanted to impress women and, you know, look like a badass, then yeah, of course. But you know, it's not like back then I could take those skinny, you know, those girl jeans off that I was wearing and put on normal man pants. This stuff's permanent, obviously. So yeah, I would never in a million years get any of this done again. So I concur. And I frankly, I know quite a few tattooers who feel the same way. Like, man, I wish I wouldn't have got my neck and hands tattooed. So
yeah.
So get your neck and hands tattooed, kids, if you're watching.
Yeah. It's a good point you make, you know, especially when you're young and you're trying to figure out who you are. And we don't really have, rites of passage in our culture anymore.
Right.
So when you're a leaf on the wind and you're trying to prove to yourself or to other people or try to become a man or what have you, you know, you'll make some goofy decisions, even if you have good advice being given to you. You know, you're not necessarily going to take it. You're going to do whatever you're going to do, right? And that's how I have, you know, thousands of hours of ink on me. So
yeah. Do you know who Jack Donovan is?
I do, yes.
Yeah, I'm not a huge Jack Donovan fan, but I'm familiar with his work. I've read some of his stuff, and he kind of touches on that, on tattooing, modern tattooing, having a sort of a tribal rite of passage connection with men of masculine character, I guess you could say. I mean, maybe not so much now. If you look on Instagram, I mean, you don't really have to be a masculine man to have your face and neck and hands tattooed, but back when he wrote that, it was a little more of a truism. So yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah, I'm also not super familiar with him, but I have read some quotes from, I think, his Right of Men or Way of Men book.
Way of Men, yeah.
Way of Men, yeah. And it rings really true to me, especially in my early 20s when I was really looking for a tribe, quote unquote, looking to figure out where I fit into this whole this whole pattern that we're living in. So I definitely can understand where that's coming from. It also didn't help that I went to art school, and one of my art class, one of the classes I took was basically a tribal rites of passage class that talked a lot about tattooing, a lot about scarification and these sorts of things, and how all these tribes all over the world, like that's how you show like your rank in the tribe and all these things. And as a kid, like that was very alluring to me. There was something about like, oh yeah, I'm going through some visible pain, like you can tell I went through some pain to get this, and some goofy stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's our little tattoo section. Nice, I like it. Um,
It's good
you,
to just do it and get it out of the way.
yeah,
'Cause
let's
you
just
know
get,
that,
yeah, just get it out of the way.
you
I'm
know that
covered
people
in
want to
them.
hear.
Yeah.
So get it out of the way. There we go. We talked about tattoos. All right.
Excellent.
Next.
You did comment earlier, though, at the beginning that you didn't have like a huge conversion story, but would you mind going into the story that
Yeah.
you do have? Because I'm always very interested to hear how people come to Orthodox Christianity,
Right.
especially in the West, where it's really not very prevalent. Like your options are basically Protestantism and Catholicism.
Right. Which are definitely places I've been. So
Me too. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I guess I didn't want to make it sound like it was just, I mean, I don't know. I just don't want to sound like there's a million conversion stories and you know, I know people who have these crazy conversion stories where they were, you know, like heroin addicted gay prostitutes or something, you know what I mean? They have like these crazy stories. And so in the grand scheme of conversion stories, mine doesn't sound too compelling, but yeah, I'll kind of go into it briefly. So I was raised in a, I guess you could say, a nominally Catholic home. Not, you know, my mom was Catholic, but like so many people, she had some bad experiences in the Catholic Church and just church in general. And so she kind of drifted away from it as far as being like she said, like a cookie cutter Catholic, go to mass every Sunday kind of thing. So, so I went to Catholic school. There's a period of, I think, I don't know how many years in my grade school years, there was like a period of time where I went to Catholic school. So that definitely imprinted on me, going to mass and that whole thing as a kid. But I wouldn't say that I was Catholic insofar. I mean, I'd gone through I was baptized and through all the stuff you go through, but I was never confirmed, I guess, because I wasn't old enough when we stopped doing that. So inevitably, as a family, we drifted away. I had some family issues, got divorced, the classic American dream. And I found my way in high school. I was kind of adrift in high school, kind of a nerdy loner type dude. I was into skateboarding. I was never any good at it.
Me neither.
Yeah, I sucked at it, but I was really good. The one trick I was really good at was the walk, where you hold it and you just walk down the street.
You look
really good at that.
You look like you should have. You look like the skater. You got that part down.
Yeah, well, that's all that matters most of the time. So yeah, I'd made some friends that way through skateboarding and stuff like that. And I met this friend in high school he was super cool, really nice, surprisingly nice. It wasn't condescending like most kids around me were. And around that time, I was super into Nine Inch Nails, in high school. Like that was sort of when Nine Inch Nails, right before Downward Spiral came out. I bought the broken tape, and that was like that's one of like the most mind-blowing moments of my childhood or preteen teen years, was listening to Broken by Trent or by Nine Inch Nails. So I remember I was listening to that, and this kid in my math class was like, "Hey, what are you listening to?" And I let him listen to it, and he's like, "Oh, that's okay, cool. Well, hey, you want to come over to my house later? I got this group of friends and blah blah blah." Now, looking at it now, I know what he was doing. He was like a evangelical Christian kid, and especially in the 90s, this was right before. Have you ever heard of the band DC Talk?
No.
As somebody watching this will know who DC Talk is if you were involved in evangelicalism in the 90s. They're like this contemporary Christian band who released this like mega hit album. You ever heard that song Jesus Freak? You remember that?
Yes.
Okay, then you know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
That's the band that released that song. And this was about the time, I think that came out right after this time. So anyway, it was that whole like ethos of evangelicalism, I guess. And so, and this kid was part of that. So I had no idea what was going on. I was like, wow, this kid's nice, and he's not a complete dick to me. So yeah, I'll go hang out with him. And my mom at this time was, just like, yeah, go, whatever. I have my own demons I'm dealing with, so go do your thing. And so I went over there, and I walked in their door, and I met his mom, and she was just the sweetest lady, and his dad was cool. He had like a nuclear family that was, it was just awesome. His brother was cool. Everybody, it was just a normal family, like what you'd think everyone in America should have. that's what this kid had. And it was, I think looking back now, I think that's more what drew me than their, weird Pentecostal Christianity that I experienced that evening. It weirded me out. Anyway, so I go to church and they're jumping and jiving and doing the, holy roller thing. And I had no idea what was going on. It didn't creep me out. I was just like, this is really bizarre. But I kept going because I liked their home environment, and I started going to the youth group and hanging out and stuff like that. And I wouldn't say that it wasn't, a lot of people look at something like that and say, okay, well, you were manipulated or whatever. And it's like, no, I don't think it was manipulated. I think they just had something that I was after, and that was like a stable family environment,
Yeah.
So anyway, I kept going, and over that year, I kind of became part of their family. I became really good friends with this kid, and it all led up to the, hey, do you want to come to Bible camp? And so I'd never been to summer camp, and I was like, absolutely. So I forget what we did. We did some fundraisers. I made enough money to go, and I went to Bible camp. And this time from when I first went to church with them, and again, I think it was like a Assemblies of God or a Foursquare church or something like that. It was a mainline Pentecostal church. It wasn't, I don't want to make it sound like it was like Benny Hinn, like there wasn't some weirdo with like a big white coat, like hitting you with the Holy Spirit. It was very tame, but they still did the thing that they do. So anyway, so I went to Bible camp, and this whole year I'd been going to church. It was just, I had no idea. I should really understand what was going on. I mean, they were talking about Jesus and stuff, and I was all cool with that, but I didn't really have any like connection to it. And I started to kind of want to, but I was just, like I was more there to hang out with this kid and the friends that I'd made. And so I go to Bible camp, and there's this guy who was like our youth group leader. And this Bible camp was people from all over. I grew up in Montana, by the way. So this is like Western Montana area. And I go to this Bible camp. It's this beautiful campus where they have this Bible camp, and like gorgeous lake, picturesque, like what you would think of summer camp would be. It's pretty small, not a lot of kids there. And but there's people that come from in this denomination. There's groups that come from all over Montana. Okay. And so I remember we go to chapel the first night, and I'm sitting there, and our youth group leader, Tony, who was like this big sheriff's deputy, like, the total father figure for lost young men. I mean, he was like really like right place, right time for me in my life. And I remember sitting there, and the guy that's leading this church camp, whatever, I forget his name, but he's like the pastor, that whatever, the minister. Mm-hmm. They're doing their thing, and somebody's playing the keyboards, and they're doing their talking about Jesus and altar call thing that they do. And it was really bizarre because I was sitting there, and in my mind I thought, man, I really don't understand any of this stuff, but I don't know. I was just in this weird place. And right after I said that in my own mind, like my own inner monologue, Tony was sitting behind me, and he leaned forward and tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, I know you have a lot of questions. He like whispered in my ear, he said, I know you have a lot of questions, and I know you don't understand a lot of this, but God's going to change that tonight. So it was like this, it was one of these things. And I had this weird feeling come over me. And then when they did the whole altar call, I went up there and prayed, and I had a legitimate born again experience. I don't claim to understand that stuff or why God does that in these sects, or being Orthodox now, I understand that, I know all the heady theology about why that's not the church and blah blah blah.
Sure.
But at the same time, the people that end up Orthodox, like me and you, who come to Orthodoxy outside of an Orthodox culture, were drawn there through these sects or these other versions of Christianity, these heretical versions of Christianity. And so I never will sit and say that there's no there. They're not the church. They don't have the fullness of the Holy Spirit or whatever. Right. I don't make those claims because it's above my pay grade. If you want to talk about that in depth, email Father Peter Harris, or he'll set you straight. I promise. But as far as like the aspect of how did I become a Christian? That's how I became a Christian. I had a born again experience at an American Pentecostal church camp, and my life changed. It's one of the most vivid moments of my life. I still didn't understand Christ, but I felt like an actual presence for the first time ever. It felt real. And so, long story short, I'll condense all this down, so this isn't a 9-hour podcast, but I was about 15 or 16 years old at that time. And I became a Christian throughout high school. And if you're a Christian in high school, you bounce around. You don't, most of these kids come of age, you try drugs. Most kids do,
Yeah.
you have a girlfriend, you do things you're not supposed to do. And of course I did those things. When I was kind of aimless. I didn't really do good in school. I hated academics. I hated school, at least in that capacity. And so I joined the military, right? My birthday's in June, and I shipped out right at the end of August. So I had a couple months there. And I left, I left for the military. I did that for, I did one tour, in the US Army. I was stationed in Europe, over in Germany. And, I drifted away from Christianity. I still had that anchor there, but when you're 18 years old in a European country and you can legally drink, you just get up, and you're around people that might not hold your values or whatever. You do things you're not supposed to do. So I definitely did that. And I got out of the military shortly, in 2002. So it was 99 when I joined. It was 2002 and I got out right after September 11th. The world was crazy. And from that point, I was still a Christian, but I wasn't a Christian like you would, this is what defines my life. That
Right.
It was there. But it was sort of in the background. I was young. I was 20, trying to sow my wild oats or whatever. And so for a little while there, I was aimless. I worked at Guitar Center. I worked at a skateboard shop. I was in a band for a while, and we toured a little bit. Nothing major, but and then I met my wife. She got pregnant, just like like you would expect, and then we got married. But this whole time I was a Christian, but I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't this committed Christian. But as I got a little older, I got into the tattoo industry around that time. I was getting tattooed by this friend of mine when I was in this band, and he kind of got my foot in the door, and got me hooked up with the right people to do an apprenticeship. And so, the kind of Christian I was during these years was more I'm still really, who Rich Mullins is? Ever heard of him?
Yes.
Okay, Rich Mullins is outside of Orthodoxy. Anyone associated with Orthodoxy or saints or elders, whatever. I think Rich Mullins is probably the man I admire most outside of the Orthodox Church. Rich Mullins was kind of an anchor for me. His music and just him, his life, him as a person was an anchor for me as far as my belief in God for a very long time. And so, yeah, I read that Ragamuffin Gospel book. I was really into Brennan Manning and kind of the birth of the emergent, the emergent church thing with Rob Bell was sort of a part of that. These wishy-washy kind of hipster Christian.
Okay. Yeah.
Very, there's two, I guess this segues perfectly into where I'm going with this. The emergent church thing was Shane Claiborne. I don't know if that name rings a bell. It was these kind of hipster, younger Christians who weren't getting what they needed spiritually out of contemporary evangelicalism. So they started searching. Some guys ended up reading about St. Benedict, like the rule of St. Benedict, and they ended up doing these quasi-monastic communities. Essentially, I feel like a lot of these guys were looking for orthodoxy.
Yeah.
Essentially, a lot of them actually have become Orthodox now, years later. But this movement was it started out, like I said, with these younger hipster guys trying to find a more real expression of Christianity, a way to be a Christian in a way that transcended the emotive kind of evangelicalism that we all would have experienced in the 90s and early 2000s. So at this time, I'm living in Seattle, tattooing over there, and I started going to this church called Mars Hill. Have you ever heard of Mars Hill?
No, no, I haven't.
Mar-
That's interesting though. I lived in Seattle for a while, and I'm not familiar.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
When were you there?
I was there 2014 to 2016 ish, or maybe
Yeah,
shift that down a year, something like
Mars Hill was toast by then. I was there in like the early or the mid aughts, like 2005, maybe 2004, 2005.
that. Okay.
The years are a blur, but anyway,
Yeah.
I guarantee you someone listening to this will know who Mark Driscoll is and Mars Hill. Mark Driscoll is a pastor who in Seattle, which is like this really unchurched, quote, unchurched area of the country. And he started this really successful church because he was preaching. I mean, it inevitably, it was like neo-reformed Christianity. It was Calvinism, but it was very masculine. And when he first started things, he would like cuss during his sermons, which back then, you know, that was so edgy or whatever. But he would talk about things, and he had conviction. He wasn't, you know, he would say like homosexuality is wrong, or it's wrong to sleep with your girlfriend. Things that like a lot of evangelical churches or pastors would at that time were kind of weaseling out of, or,
Yeah.
you know, the culture wars thing wasn't so like it is now. It wasn't so hard, you know, head to head, super hardcore.
Yeah.
So a lot of these things people just didn't talk about at church or out in the open. They were a little more vague. But anyway, yeah, I from before we went to Mars Hill, I was sort of into this like emergent church stuff, if that makes sense. Not really committed to a denomination or church, but like mere Christianity. You know, super into C.S. Lewis and that kind of thing. And then when we found Mars Hill, we started going there, and I got really connected with Mars Hill. Got pretty involved there. And then somewhere along the way, Mark started teaching, the pastor, Mark Driscoll, started teaching on the Reformation, started teaching about John Calvin, Luther, all of the historic reformers. And if not for Mark Driscoll, I probably wouldn't be Orthodox, because he was the one that gave me a little bit of a appreciation for church history, because it never occurred to me that I just assumed Christians were like I was for 2,000 years. You know what I mean? I just never really thought, I never read anything, you know, just like, oh, the New Testament, like, I don't really care. I knew about Luther, but it's not something I really cared about. And so Mark was talking about Luther, and of course he painted the picture that these guys were saints and that they did this great thing, and, you know, whatever. And so, yeah, I got super interested in church history through him. Well, around this time, I also really started having doubts about Christianity. It kind of at the same time, it was really weird. I started reading more philosophy, more. I don't want to say that. I don't want to represent myself like I'm like I was reading Heidegger, and you know, like I don't want to. That's not what I mean. I was just confronting some pretty low-level, basic challenges to Christianity that a lot of evangelicals, they just steer clear of, or they'll like watch a Ravi Zacharias video and call it good, you know. I went beyond that because I made a vow to myself around the time I was going to Mars Hill that when I started having these doubts, you know, I was like, no matter where it takes me, I want to know what's true. I don't care if it means this whole experience I've had all these years with Christianity was a delusion or whatever, then so be it. I value what's true. And so that road led me away from Christianity. And that's a really long conversation. I'll kind of skip over it, but I inevitably we left Mars Hill. We moved away out of the Seattle area, more north. And around that time, Mark was under pressure for something, of course, you know, nothing like super sketchy. It wasn't like, you know, doing it with any of the women there, at least that I know of. He was a really egotistical guy, and a lot of these really big personalities in the evangelical Protestant world, there's no hierarchy, there's no authority structure really, like we have in the historic church. There's an authority structure. There's bishops that are literally given that authority by God, and that doesn't exist in Protestantism in any capacity. And so Pastor Billy Bob can be this great pastor, but what if you have a break in what he believes? Like, what if you break away from what he believes and you don't agree? Well, you just go down the road and you say, well, God told me to set up another church because Pastor Billy Bob's wrong. And, there you go. There's the authority, by what authority, essentially. So that's where I ended up. So anyway, I started having all these problems. Mars Hill started to dissolve. And watching that start to happen, it didn't inevitably fall apart for many years, but seeing the cracks made me I'm a pessimist by nature, which I have a hard time with. I struggle with being black-pilled and being a pessimist, but
yeah, me too.
very, very much so. I'm very sardonic at times, which is not good. But that's just how I've always been. So yeah, just seeing the open hypocrisy and losing faith in some of these men that I'd seen as leaders only added fuel to the fire of these philosophical problems that I was having with evangelicalism. And for what it's worth, a lot of the challenges to Christianity in the West that come from academia or these people who, like these professional unbelievers, like Sam Harris. That you remember the big we're the four horsemen.
That's right.
Yeah. I look back at it now and those guys are like clowns. This is just the stuff.
Yeah, but I was totally taken in by those guys. So me too. I know where you're at.
I think a lot of people were, and they were like legitimately threatening to me at the time because I never, like, I look at it now and it's like, these are just, the stupidest issue, like the stupidest questions are, these guys are like coming at you with these like weaponized idiocy that, and as an Orthodox Christian, now I look at it and I'm like, that question doesn't even deserve an answer because it's so outside of our sphere that it's irrelevant. Like this is totally, and I'm not a Western basher at all. So don't get me wrong when I say a totally Western thing. Mm-hmm. I'm not the guy who will just like scapegoat the West, like it's all the West fault, like some people do. It's kind of an easy out, but I try not to do that. But yeah, with the at the time, the things that these guys were saying in these like BTFO debates on YouTube or whatever, when I actually gave them a listen and didn't just like bury my head in the sand, they had some very challenging things they were saying. It was actually Christopher Hitchens, because I always thought he was hilarious. Yeah. And he was he really is a fantastic writer, even though he's, full of crap. Like his stuff about Mother Teresa was just like, I wanted to scream, but he was a great writer. His rhetorical skills, his verbal IQ was just incredible. So anyway, I ended up having a crisis of faith, and people throw that around lightly, like, oh, I'm having a crisis of faith, right? Like, no, I had a crisis of faith. How I saw the world was through a Christian worldview, like a very basic Christian worldview, but I believed in the God of the Bible. Mm-hmm. Now, the God I believed in then was, and still is to some degree, we all struggle with this, but was a caricature of the actual God, because any God you can think of is idolatry. When you're sitting there and thinking of God and you're projecting that mental image of the object in your mind that is God, that's idolatry. You're not supposed to do that, But at the time, as an evangelical, that's all I knew. And so I had built this God, and when it was challenged, what does Christ say? The storm came, and my house wasn't built on a solid foundation. It was a foundation of sand. And so the bottom fell out of my whole entire worldview, and I had a very real existential crisis that manifested itself physically. Like I had to take almost 2 weeks off of work because it was so traumatic. And that I'm not ashamed to say that it really was traumatic. I remember I had this really dope 90 Toyota pickup, which gave me like 350,000 miles. This thing was indestructible. I mean, even with a blown head gas, it was like shooting white smoke out of the back of the snow on like one cylinder, Rest in peace, Toyota. But I remember, I'll never forget sitting in that truck and just like, I have to do a tattoo in like 20 minutes and I'm just crying, sitting there like uncontrollably crying, because I had to face the reality that there is no God. And the reality, not just like there is no God, your sky daddy's not there. No, 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 no. I had to face the reality that death is real, and it was the fact of the abyss, you know, like non-existence was there. It was like personified non-existence, death, the end. I was listening to a lot of Death Cab for Cutie at the time too, so I don't know.
I'm sure that didn't help.
That definitely didn't help, but I digress. Yeah, it was really traumatic. And so there was a couple years where, I mean, I obviously got through it. I became a lot more, you know, things leveled out, and I became a lot more cynical, but in a more of a covert way. I don't think I got depressed, but I just became very cynical. Started smoking weed again, which I hate marijuana. I've always hated how it made me feel. But I started smoking a ton of weed. At the time I lived kind of by Bellingham's, this little town called Burlington. And I worked at a really cool shop. I just had a lot of issues at the time. And so unfortunately I didn't, you know, I didn't end up staying there, but yeah, I just had this meltdown. And anyway, so for a few years, I just existed in this, like, what I call it is I was a reluctant atheist. I wasn't an agnostic because to me, if you're an agnostic, I've never met an agnostic who was genuinely like proactively looking for an answer to me. And forgive me if anyone is an agnostic or they claim that label. I'm not I'm not saying it in like a negative way. I'm not trying to, like, you know, be nasty to agnostics or claim that they're, you know, stupid or whatever, or insincere. But I've never met an agnostic who didn't just say, I'm agnostic, because they just didn't care, you know, or they hadn't reached a point in their life where these bigger questions about God really mattered. And so, so I called myself a reluctant atheist. I wasn't happy about it. I didn't make stupid Reddit posts about how dumb God is, or, you know, like, I wasn't into that at all. I didn't read atheist literature. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't view myself as this like quasi Nietzsche. I just sort of put those questions out of my mind, or they were kind of in the peripheral or whatever. So I remember sitting talking to a friend of mine. We had smoked a ton of weed. He grew marijuana. I mean, northwestern Washington. He grew marijuana. I bet you're shocked.
Yeah, I never met that guy before.
This guy grew weed, you know, like, anyway, yeah, we were super stoned just watching some movie. And I remember, and he was a Christian, but one of those kind of, yeah, man, I'm a Christian too. And we were talking about something related to God. And I just looked and I was like, dude, I'm kind of an atheist now, man. And it shocked him, because I was the one years ago, you know, years before that it sort of brought him back to a belief in God. And it just, like, when I saw the look on his face, I realized, like, what I believe impacts other people. Mm-hmm. Not that I'm important, or that what I decide I believe will, you know what I mean? Like, I don't mean that in like I'm not trying to like be self-aggrandizing, like I'm important and what I believe is the most important thing. That's not what I mean. The people around me that I care about are impacted by what I believe about ultimate reality. And so that just blew my mind. I don't know why I never thought of it before. And then I got to thinking, like, well, what about my family? Mm-hmm. You know? And they are impacted by what I believe, and not just what I believe, but how I, you know, what's the utility of that? Like what you believe should impact how you live your life. Yes. And I think the culture we live in is sort of antithetical to that, because you can, and I don't want to get off on a rabbit trail about consumerism or whatever, but religion is essentially just another consumer tribal identity. And orthodoxy is that too, a lot of the times, unfortunately. Like, I'm guilty of it myself. Mm-hmm. Currently guilty of it. Like, it's impossible, because it's impossible to break away from this approaching your faith or approaching anything outside of the realm of tribal consumer identity. Because as Americans or Westerners, we don't have a really strong cohesive cultural identity that people in Poland or Russia or Japan or whatever, or maybe not Japan, but China, you know, countries that haven't really been infected by this whatever you want to call it, neoliberalism or whatever. And I feel like, I don't know, I feel like the reason why we can't really break out of seeing the world or approaching important things that way is because it would be like taking a fish out of, you know, taking a fish out of one fishbowl and putting him into another. And I can't even think of an analogy. That's a really stupid analogy, but you get what I'm trying to say. It's just, it's literally the air we breathe. It's impossible not to see the world in that way. And so anyway, when I had that moment, I went home and I chalked it up to I'm high, you know, whatever. And the next day I woke up and it really stuck with me. And so about a week after that, you know, it was on my mind this whole time, but I sort of, again, pushed it out of my mind a little bit more. And I was flipping through the channels and Pope Benedict was on TV. And I remembered like, oh yeah, I used to go to Catholic school, I was raised Catholic. And so I turned it up and it was just, it looked ridiculous to me. There's this guy that looked like Emperor Palpatine and this, you know, looked kind of like Santa Claus too. He had this like red get up on, and there are all these like weirdos in white dresses around it. It was just bizarre to me. But it was interesting. I thought it was very interesting. And as I was watching, I don't know why, it was on PTVe10 too. And I don't know why I was watching it for so long. And I realized I don't know anything about Catholicism. Like I know zero. All I know is chick tract level stuff like Whore of Babylon and all the stuff that you would hear in a, you know, your average fundamentalist Protestant church. And so I got on the internet and just started Googling stuff about the Catholic Church. And I made my way to, of all places, Wikipedia. And I found this page that had the list of popes. And I was looking through it and reading and like scrolling down and you know, it has the name of the pope and how long he reigned the year. And as I was going down, I was like, wait a minute, whoa. And I went back to the top, all the way to the bottom, top to bottom. And I had this epiphany. This church, this religious tradition, this group has an unbroken line of men who have held this position all the way back to the time of Christ. That was just like it blew my mind. And then that just piqued my interest. So I started reading more online and watching YouTube videos and stuff. And it was very intriguing because there was that part of me that remembers certain things from when I was a kid. I remember little things, even though it was like, that was around the time of like that period of time where it was the bad Novus Ordo years. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like every single parish was having a problem with felt banners, and it was bad news. And
that was probably during the time where the scandals were all happening, the abuse scandals and everything.
Oh yeah. And there was that. I mean, there was that aspect too. I definitely thought about that. But the more I read online, the more interested I became actually in Catholicism. And then I stumbled across this priest named Father Robert Barron, who's now Bishop Barron, who runs like this huge apostolate called The Word on Fire. But at the time, he was just this like academic. He was just making these one-off YouTube videos, and he had just started doing that. Or I don't even think he was doing that. I think he was just. I think it was. Anyway, there wasn't much out there by him, but he was explaining Aquinas or something like that. And I don't even remember what it was, but one of the things I remember that stuck out to me most was, this is serious stuff. Like, this isn't just, and not to say that like William Lane Craig and all of these evangelical academics aren't serious people. They are. William Lane Craig is like a legit philosopher. He's a smart guy. But this was different. This was totally different. And I don't know if it was because it had the authority thing behind it. Like, okay, this is like by name, I can go all the way back to the time of Christ. You know, doesn't that count for something? And then, so I watched some of these videos from other people besides Father Robert Barron, but he was one that stood out. Father Robert Spitzer, I watched some of his stuff. He's this like kind of nerdy, sciencey priest. He's a good Jesuit, basically. And then I found Father Mitch Pacwa. I found all the big brain Catholic stuff, and it just fascinated me. And I watched more and more and more of it. And then I started coming across these conversion stories of these evangelicals and these Protestants, and that was what totally blew my mind. I'm like, wait a minute, this is a two-way street here.
Mhm.
Because you spend your time in these evangelical churches, you're just meeting people like, oh, I was a Catholic and I left that. That's the whore of Babylon. That's the, traditions of men. Like, you hear all this stuff and you think that it's just this one-way street to true Christianity, being born again or whatever, all the things
Right.
that they say. But when I discovered that this is a two-way street, there's a ton of people who end up Roman Catholic who were Presbyterian, whatever, Methodist, whatever. And I started watching The Journey Home. You ever seen that?
I haven't.
So The Journey Home, I'll still occasionally watch it. It's on EWTN, and all it is conversion stories of how people, it's specifically people who come from other faith traditions, but it's mostly Protestants that become Catholic. And there's, I don't know, thousands of them. There's tons and tons of them. And it's on EWTN, and it's hosted by this guy named Marcus Grodi, who's this former Presbyterian minister. And anyway, yeah, I started watching these. Basically, I was on track to become a Catholic. I didn't know that at the time. But one day, I think I heard Father Mitch Pacwa or something, some podcast I was listening to, said, if you're interested in this, talk to a Catholic priest, And for some reason, it had never occurred to me, like, hey, why don't I go talk to a priest? What am I doing? And this was a period of about 6 months where I'm reading and listening to these. One of the things that Catholics do really, really well is media evangelism. They have so much stuff, and for every flavor of person, like, they have Catholic Answers, they have all of these media apostolates, all these radio stations, all this stuff. So if you're interested in Catholicism, it's really accessible. You can really get a lot out of it quickly. And so, Orthodoxy is getting there, I think. But Roman Catholicism, that they've really nailed that big time in the English-speaking world. But so anyway, yeah, I think why I maintained interest was the question throughout this period of time where I was an atheist and exploring Catholicism was because that was still the most important question. It might not have been something that I was always clawing at or whatever, like always trying to figure out, but it was definitely in the forefront of my mind because as a Christian, that was the most important aspect of who I was and how I saw the world. And when that gets removed, you're left aimless and you want to replace that. And so the Catholicism thing really started to appeal to me. And it was because it was sort of speaking to that void that I had in my soul or whatever. So anyway, I'm consuming all this Catholic content and considering talking to a priest. And then I discover through Catholic apologetics that there's this Orthodox church, and the Eastern Catholics. And I didn't really get into that stuff. I didn't really understand that. But I started looking at the Orthodox church. And I'd heard of Greek Orthodox and all this stuff. And never really I just thought it was really weird, weird ethnic, kind of like how a person in the West now might view Hinduism, to be honest. Like, you just look at it and there's all these this weird art, and it's like interesting and colorful and whatever, but there's nothing that draws you to it from the outset. And so, but the more I learned about Catholicism, the more I learned about Orthodoxy, sort of by proxy or whatever. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but I by osmosis, I started to learn about Orthodoxy. And I was just, again, fooling around on the internet, and I found that there was this Orthodox church kind of close to where I lived. And I started reading about them. They had like a little bio on their page. And again, I keep saying my mind was blown, but this period of time was like, I had all these crazy experiences and epiphanies. This church in their bio explained how they were Baptists or something. And the whole church converted to Orthodox Christianity.
I've heard of these things happening, like entire parishes converting to Orthodoxy.
Yeah, it was the priest's name is Father David Hovick in oh my gosh, I used to live in Burlington, Washington. It's I forget the name of the town. I'm really bad with names, but it was just south of Mount Vernon in Burlington, Washington. And that was the first Orthodox church I ever went into. And so before I met with this Catholic priest in the Mount Vernon area, I decided to go check out this Orthodox church. And so I went to a liturgy one Sunday, and it was the weirdest thing. You know, I was chanting. It was really boring. I didn't know what was going on. And there was like kids everywhere. It was just very alien. But the thing that stood out was all of the people I met were normal people. They were very nice. And it was a weird kind of juxtaposition between these people were just very, they weren't like obnoxiously overbearing, but they were just real nice and normal people. And then they were doing this weird church service, and there was, iconography all over. And, I was kind of looking at the icons. I didn't really understand, but that stuck out in my mind. That was the first liturgy I went to, the first time I ever had experienced Orthodox Christianity. So anyway, I ended up taking some of the little pamphlets they have or whatever, and I met with this Catholic priest shortly thereafter, and the church was he was almost like, I don't know, he wasn't like, yeah, I'd love to have you. He was just like, hey, so I just have to level with you. If you come to church here, this is a very, like, most people that come here, they just come here because it's like an ethnic thing, and I just don't want you to be disappointed. And I'm like, that's not really the best way to welcome. Hey, I'm interested in Catholicism. Yeah, man, I just want to let you know that this probably isn't what you're thinking. Like, that's not really the way to welcome somebody to church.
Not a good
He was
sale.
real nice. I think he was maybe burned out or something, because he was like a former Anglican priest who had come in. He was married, which is my first real interaction with a Catholic priest, was a married former Anglican.
That's
priest.
very strange.
Very, very weird, but very nice guy.
Yeah.
But anyway, long story short with that, he basically told me, yeah, man, most people that attend here are, Hispanic, because that area of Washington, there's a huge Hispanic population. And he's like, they're mostly Hispanic. It's most of the stuff I do is related to that. And so if you're looking for a parish that's more convert friendly, I'm not sure what to tell you. So, and that was the only one close to me. So I went there a few times, and I met with him twice. And the second time he was like, well, you're Catholic. All you have to do is just, you could probably just start, you do confession, you can receive communion, and then, we'll formalize it at Easter, and you're good to go. I was like, okay, so you mean I can just be a Catholic? And he's like, yeah, you already are, pretty much. So I was still interested in Orthodoxy, but because the Catholic thing wasn't as foreign, I just went with that. And anyway, so I around the time that happened, we moved to Eastern Washington, where we are now. And it was all about 10 years ago now. And I started attending we have a big cathedral here, Our Lady of Lourdes. And I got involved in their community there. The rector there wanted me to do RCIA because I'd been out of it. They did it right, basically. They weren't like, yeah, it's cool, man, but you don't really want to come here. They were like, hey, yeah, whatever. When I did RCIA, I was like the most annoying guy in the class, because there was this, the guy teaching was a transitional deacon, and that's not a transgender thing. That's that's not it at all. It's in the Roman Catholic Church, when you're being ordained a priest, you have this period of time where you're a deacon, like part of their orders. And so he was a transitional deacon. He was on his way to the priesthood, and he got tasked with teaching the adult catechism class. And 95% of the people in that class were there because they're getting married, or some kind of like hoop they had to jump through in that respect. It was me and like one other kid who was there that wanted to become Catholic, a genuine conversion. And so I asked all these dumb questions. I asked I just annoyed him, basically. And so I made it through that, and I started going to mass there or whatever. But during this time, and this wasn't a very long period of time, it was a period, maybe like a year. When I started going to mass and taking Eucharist and trying to be Catholic, there was still something missing. It still wasn't quite right. And I started reading more and more about Orthodoxy this time, and during this time. And I don't know. I got really frustrated. I'll try to like summarize the Catholic period. I got really frustrated as a Roman Catholic because I jumped in with 2 feet, and I found that it still wasn't it still wasn't what I was after. I guess you could say it should have been, but it just wasn't. I can't explain it with words. That's just how it is. And I even tried the traditional Latin Mass. We have an FSSP and a huge SSPX community out here. Not to offend anyone, but it just wasn't my thing. The culture was just very insular, and I don't want to say I had a bad experience, but it was very not what I was looking for. Culturally, it was just very, I just didn't fit in. I'll just put it that way. And so, I kind of got frustrated, and I reached a point where I decided to start checking out these Orthodox churches. And as when I decided that, I was actually reading a lot more about the Orthodox Church, and I discovered that it was like a dig here sign. Like, okay, this is where you need to dig. And a lot of the stuff about Orthodoxy, when you read this Catholic conversion literature, like Scott Hahn and all these guys, very intelligent guys, extremely intelligent, far smarter than I am. But a lot of the things they say about why you shouldn't be Orthodox and why you should be Catholic are always predicated upon these, like, either very nefarious interpretations of how do I put this? I won't go down that road. I'll just say it didn't add up to me. Mm-hmm. At the time, I just accepted it. But when I dug into it, I was like, oh, okay, this doesn't really fly. I'm seeing that there's some problems here historically, and I'm starting to not really buy into the Catholic claims of authority, like the papal claims of authority. And then I encountered some of the weirder stuff, the apparitions, and how, I got really creeped out by Medjugorje and Fatima, and all that stuff really just didn't sit right with me. That was actually a big issue, to be honest. I saw kind of a strange fixation on that stuff. And, this in the Catholic Church, there's this claim of unity, I guess you could say. But in reality, it's very disjointed. There's all these different spiritualities, and that wouldn't necessarily be a problem, but there's all these like almost like strange cultural ghettos or spiritual ghettos within Roman Catholicism. And that exists in Orthodoxy, but the Orthodox don't make this like claim that the Catholic Church does about their unity. That's different. We sort of recognize that comes with the territory, where I feel like the Orthodox Church is a lot more honest about that, whereas the Catholic Church, frankly, the only like the linchpin that they have left is that that unity under this like monarch that's the Pope or whatever. And so I know some Catholic spurt's gonna watch this and get really upset with me. I'm not a theologian. This is just my own personal experience, so I don't mean to offend. I love the Catholic. I do a lot of work for the Catholic Church. I have a lot of friends that are Catholic, priests, you name it. So definitely just my own personal experience. So with that being said, I decided to check out Orthodoxy, and I went to a Greek Orthodox church that I still attend now, sometimes in town in Spokane. And the priest, Father Stephen, was like, hey, I talked to him after I think it was like a weekday liturgy, and talked to him for about a half hour downstairs, and he was like, oh, you're Catholic, cool. He said, hey, I want you to check out this other parish. And I was like, okay. But he didn't say it like he didn't want me there. He was like, you can come here, but there's this other priest in town that I really think you should check out. You might actually fit better there. You're welcome here, but I want you to check that place out first. And he gave me a couple books, and so I did that. And again, he did it in a way as to where it wasn't like he was, run along, I don't want to deal with you. He was genuinely being pastoral and trying to look out for me. And so I inevitably went to this parish, and it was an Antiochian church, and he was right. It was all converts, and it was great, and I started going there, taking my kids, and I inevitably was going to start I was going to try to bring my wife, but the priest was like, why don't you guys come over for dinner and meet the family, and then you can weird her out with our strange liturgy. and it was very wise of him, because she was able to meet the people, and then going to see the service, she was like, okay, this is a little weird, but these are normal people, just like us. So there's something here. And so anyway, we went to that, started going there. I became an inquirer and a catechumen real quick. And part of the catalyst for me that allowed me to sort of decouple from Roman Catholicism was, I mean, it was multiple things, but one of the things that stood out to me was reading, I mean, this is like cookie cutter, everybody says this, but it's just because it's so impactful. It's Father Seraphim Rose.
Yeah.
Father Seraphim Rose, it wasn't necessarily his work on nihilism, or it was like an article or something he wrote about prelates and about delusion. That was the first thing that stuck out, because as my time as a Catholic, there was really no scrutiny put on visions and that sort of thing, or interlocutions. I mean, there is, they say, you know, there are people who say, oh, we should trust that. But there's sort of like this culture of vision chasing and like miracle hunting. There's literally a podcast, a Catholic podcast called The Miracle Hunter, where this guy just fixates on all these like weird happenings and like he's some kind of like reporter. It's just really bizarre. And so when I encountered Father Seraphim connecting me with like St. Theophan the Recluse and all of these elders and monastic writings that you know, under no uncertain terms say that stuff's dangerous, leave it alone, don't mess with it. And you know, that's speaking from a monastic context. How much more applicable was that for us in the world? Like, don't even bother with that stuff, ignore it, you know. And that was a big deal for me. That was one of the things that let me know, okay, this is serious. It's not just some circus gimmick. It's not just it's not just surface. There's something to this. And then when I really dug in, not just to Father Seraphim, but I could go on and on. I mean, you name it, you know, we've probably read all the same stuff. And so, yeah, that was sort of where it started. And then I sort of felt like I felt it click, for lack of a better term. Now that doesn't mean that I glow when I pray and I'm floating in the altar and all, not at all. I feel like I'm more of a bad Christian now that I've been Orthodox almost 9 years. I feel further away from Orthodoxy. The further the longer I'm Orthodox, the less Orthodox I feel. And I know that's normal. I've read that from a lot of people, but yeah, I don't know I don't know why that is. You know, I feel like worse of a Christian the longer I am one. And part of it is because you become complacent. You just do. The shiny new toy wears off. And you're left, especially if you've like, I've had some pretty gnarly experiences over the last near decade with some bad clergy and some scandals. And if you're in the Orthodox Church long enough, you'll experience that, because it's made up of, you know, bad people and good people, just like everything.
Yeah.
You know, we say the church is a hospital. You always hear that, you know, the Orthodox Church is a hospital for, you know, we're sick and it's a hospital for sinners or whatever. And I always thought that was interesting, because it's like, well, if it's a hospital, of course, in the Orthodox Church, we're going to encounter the sickest people, you know, because it's like, this is where the strongest medicine is. This is where the medicine is at. This is where you come to get legitimate spiritual psychotherapy, spiritual medical care is in the Orthodox Church. It's nowhere else. It's here. So obviously you're going to be surrounded by these terminally ill people, spiritually terminally ill. So we should expect that. You know, we shouldn't be scandalized by it. But that being said, you know, I had some pretty crazy experiences over the last few years. I mean, it's long gone, but a pretty gnarly falling out at a church and bad stuff, but, you know, still Orthodox. And I think, I don't know, having a little bit of perspective now, I can look back and, you know, connecting it back to what I was talking about earlier when I lost faith in God. Now I look back on that and I see that I had to go through that, because if you're going to build a house, if you're going to rebuild a house and you have some dilapidated shack there, you got to bring in the wrecking ball. You know, like you can take it down board by board, but I think the quickest way to do it is with the wrecking ball, to just come in and smash it. And yeah, it can be traumatic, but now I look back and I'm very thankful that God did it that way, because I was able to sort of taste what it's like to be aimlessly disconnected from God for a protracted period of time. And so I'd like to say that I don't take it for granted, but I mean, I do. We as human beings take everything for granted, but I feel like I'm blessed with a little bit of perspective to know that where I may be if I didn't have Orthodoxy. So very long-winded way of saying.
No, that's great, man. Yeah, man. A lot of what you said, I had a very similar experience with. It really rings very familiar to me and very true. I also had to have my life basically knocked out from under me to rebuild it. And I also had a very similar experience, like you were saying, where you went to your Greek parish and they suggested you go to a different church that might be better for you. I had the exact same experience. I went to a Russian, almost an entirely Russian speaking church. And the deacon at the end of it, he took me aside, and this guy, I just saw him. He was at 3 services this last week that I was at, and we saw each other again. I'm like, oh, hey, it's good to see you, but he was like, we have a sister parish that's a little farther south, you may want to go there. And it was the right call, because it's the church that I've been going to ever since. And this was like, I don't know, this is before the new year, back in October, maybe.
Is it a Rocourt church?
It's a Rocourt church. Yeah.
Nice. Huge blessing to have a Rocourt church by you.
What's that?
It's a huge blessing to have a Rocourt church by you there, man.
Yeah, it's fantastic. There were 2 kind of like at equidistant, and
wow.
I just chose one that was very ethnically Russian, and
right.
The whole service was in like Church Slavonic and everything, and it was beautiful. I had no idea what was happening,
right.
but it was great, and they got me on the right path with an English speaking parish of a lot of converts, and it was the right place to go, because I've been there ever since. Yeah, it is a journey, and getting your worldview knocked out from under you is very traumatic. Like I totally relate to you on that, because I had my life built up the way it was for a very long time, and when everything sort of fell apart, you're really lost. Like you're like, wait, this isn't. So I'm almost, at the time I was almost 30, and I thought I had most things figured out, and I thought I saw the path for my life the way it was going to keep going, and took it all for granted. And when things really explode in your life, you really are left kind of adrift. And I thank God that that happened, though, because I wouldn't be where I am, and I wouldn't have been able to rebuild my life with a bit more discernment, I think, as an adult, Right. Yeah, I totally feel you.
I think everything it's not an I think statement. It is how it is. Everything in our existence, anything good or fruitful, or anything fruitful that can come about in your life, some type of pain and suffering, calamity precede that. And it's the same. It's the same with physical exercise. If you lift weights, I obviously don't lift weights, but if you do, how does that work? You break the muscle down through pain and trauma. Yeah. And then by giving that muscle the things it needs to rebuild, it rebuilds, and then you're stronger or whatever. That's pretty basic stuff, but one of the things about Orthodox asceticism that is just amazing is that Orthodoxy is like people talk about the natural order. Orthodoxy is the natural order. There is no natural order within Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy just is the natural order. That's how God has structured reality. Mm-hmm. I mean that not so much in the academic theological sense. I mean that quite literally in experiential sense. Everything that we do in the church has a very real reason, whether that's even if it's just to teach you typology or something, or to teach you something about God. It's not just teaching you something about God so that you know it. You know, like there's an actual reason why you need to know these things about God, because it affects how you do these other things. And so, yeah, and instead of it, and I'm going to rag on evangelicalism again, but instead of, and this is a bit of a caricature, but I'm just going to do it anyway. Instead of hyper focusing on the emotional stuff, you know, and just having this like emotional experience with God, there's more to it. You know, there is that aspect, I guess, within Orthodoxy, but I feel like it's the difference between the love or the infatuation you feel when you're like 14 versus the love that a man would feel for his wife when they've been married for 25 years. You know, there's that difference where it's like you get that, you know, that emotional spiritual experience at some like worship concert, you know, and I don't know, that a lot of that's delusion. Honestly, I think a lot of that is just emotionalism and delusion and prowess, but not all of it is. God still uses those. I don't know how. I mean, I don't get it, and it's not my job to get it. I just don't worry about that stuff anymore, to be honest. And when I stopped worrying about that, my life and my spiritual life got a lot easier, in the best possible sense. But yeah, but in Orthodox Christianity, it's more grounded. It's less like hair on fire. It's less erratic. There is none of that, actually. It's very even keel. I don't even have the words for it. It's just very healthy. Healthy is the right word. You know, everything has a place, and it's the kind of the total package. It's like you get the entire, you don't just get like the tail of the fish, you get the whole thing, you know. And I can't begin to describe how many people that I tattoo that will ask me questions about Orthodox Christianity. A lot of people do. Some people, it's just like, hey, you have a really weird religion, you know, tell me about your weird ethnic religion. Are you Russian? Are you Greek? Are you Serbian? You know, people ask me that. And, you know, I no, I'm not, but blah, 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 you know. But there have been several people who have been genuinely interested and drawn to it. And, you know, I have multiple copies of certain books that I will give to people. A couple of these people I've tattooed over the years have been pastors at pretty big denominations or whatever. And I've had a few, like there was one guy, he was a pastor, and I straight up told him we were done with this. I did this big tattoo on him, and we were talking about Orthodoxy the whole time. He was asking me questions and listening to podcasts. He was listening to like Father Thomas Hopko's podcast and just loved it. I got him one of the books I give people multiple books. One of the books is Mountain of Silence. Have you ever read that book?
I have not.
By Kyriakos Markides, which is like the most Cypriot Greek name I've ever heard. I give people that book because it's highly readable and very accessible, and it sort of touches all the bases. Talks about Letter Paisios, you know, the Theotokos. Like it talks about everything in sort of a narrative of him meeting with a monk and rediscovering his Orthodox faith. It's a fantastic book. And but I gave him the book, and I told him, you know, I explained to him, I said, you are responsible for an entire church of people. I want you to know that if you keep digging this hole that you're in, you will be out of a job. You will be out of a job, because you need to really count the cost here and ask if you're ready to do this. And that might say, I mean, I'm explaining this in like a melodramatic way. It wasn't like a movie or something, but I just straight up told him, like, this is a bridge you can't cross. You know, like once you cross this bridge, it's a one-way street. Like there are things that you learn about Christianity that you can't unlearn, and will completely and forever eternally change the way that you view the church that you're coming from, and not in a positive light for where you're at right now. So it was almost kind of like a warning. And he's not Orthodox today. And I think, I mean, I don't know, I kind of lost touch with him or whatever, but I think that, I don't know if that had an impact on him or if he just like, was like, yeah, this, I'm not interested in this, but he seemed to seriously like think about it, you know, because I think he had just taken this job as his pastor of this church. And, you know, I mean, it's really true. Orthodoxy costs you something. And I don't know what that something is. It's different for everybody. But it costs you something. And if it doesn't, you're not really doing it right. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, we just had the I think it was 2 Sundays ago when we had this reading of when Christ came down from the mountain and cured the lunatic.
Mhm.
And he asked one of the priests who did the sermon, he said, why did Christ ask how long the boy had been this way? And it's not because he didn't know. It's not like he's House MD trying to figure it out. He knows, he's God. He knows that it's been a long time. But one of the things the priest said was, the father tried everything before coming to God. And why? It's, well, maybe Jesus is going to ask something of you. Maybe he's going to tell you to stop doing something you don't want to stop doing. There's a cost, you know. I know for me, I wanted to return to Catholicism. I grew up Catholic, fell away, and I wanted to return to Catholicism when I started taking it seriously, when I realized God was real. And even if most people or I wasn't quite sure about God, I certainly knew that very evil people believed that the devil was real. And if that was the case, then the other side is true. But when I started looking into it and going back through history as an adult, as opposed to a child just playing along with going through the motions, you would say, you know, I realized I couldn't square the circle with Catholicism anymore. I couldn't return to like the faith of my grandparents and stuff, you know, like my whole family all the way back. Like there were too many issues that I just couldn't unsee after looking at it from the Orthodox perspective. So absolutely. It's
so you would say that after being exposed to Orthodoxy, and then you take a look at the current state of the Catholic Church, that had an impact, basically.
Oh yeah. Like I have vague memories of Catholicism as a child, and then when I wanted to return to it, it was even different than how I remembered it as a kid. And then starting to read into the Orthodox faith, there were much more satisfying answers in Orthodoxy. Exactly. And then if I said, okay, I'm going to take that position, and then I'm going to look at Catholicism, knowing that answer, I can see how things kind of tumbled out the way they did into like the Novus Ordo and all the Vatican I, Vatican II, and all the changes and, you know, all that stuff. Like it started to make sense if I put myself in the position of an Orthodox person. And, you know, it was mind blowing. It was just like, oh, wow, this is way deeper than I ever thought it could be.
Right.
And, you know, I realized like I couldn't go back. I had to become Orthodox, and becoming Orthodox, now there were new things expected of me that I'd never even heard of or considered or thought about when I was Catholic or culturally Catholic or whatever, you know, very basic Catholic.
Right.
It was a whole different way of looking at the world, and it does cost you something for sure.
No, it's very, like what we were talking about earlier about, I was talking about like tribal consumer tribal identities, and how that's sort of how we approach everything in the world. You know, you have people that are, and this isn't some hot take that I came up with. I mean, this is stuff that I've sort of imbibed from people with much bigger brains than me. So Yeah, I mean, basically the society we live in, because we're so, I guess, deracinated or atomized, or we're so hyper fixated on individualism. And frankly, I mean, so this is an argument that you hear a lot of people who I would call like white advocates, or people who are into like white identity, or, you know, whatever, like sanitized term for that you want to use. But anyway, yeah, there's no real cultural connection or whatever. There's no cultural identity. But I would say the longer that an ethnicity stays in the West and in America specifically, it doesn't matter if you're white, like you'll also be, all of your culture will be sucked out of you as well.
Yes.
And I know Mexican people, man, that are like, the generation they're the same bugman as like Joe Blow white guy, you know, living in wherever cosmopolitan city. You know, I mean, there's black people like that too. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, so I don't think it really is just a problem for white people.
Right.
But in general, I think it's an issue that when I say devoid of culture, I don't mean, it's not a race thing. It's, and I'm not afraid to talk about that stuff either, by the way. I'm not like dodging and trying to like use weasel words. I am not afraid to talk about that stuff at all. I'm being brutally honest about this. This consumer culture stuff is sort of that's like the software that our entire society runs on. And I think that that's part of the reason why so many people have such a hard time really becoming Orthodox in the way that, or embracing, I don't want to say becoming, because that's even using that. It's really hard to break out of that. Embracing Orthodoxy and sort of doing the things that you need to do synergistically so that the church can do what it does, that God can do what God does through the church and the sacraments. There are things you have to do.
Yes.
And it's really difficult, I've found, for us as Westerners. I don't even want to say Americans, because it really is a Western problem.
Yeah,
like
because they have the same problems in Europe as well.
Yeah,
you know. And
exactly.
It's everywhere.
And like I said earlier, I'm not like, I don't like to demonize the West. I'll criticize it, but I don't like to demonize the West, because I think people do that. I've just seen so many people do that become Orthodox, and then everything Western is dumb, and, you know, Baroque art is pornography. These are just really just really dumb things that people say. And I don't care if that offends anybody. If you say that stuff, that's just a dumb thing to say, and it's just not true. It's one of my biggest pet peeves. There's a lot in the West that is of value, and it's not all garbage. Okay. But there are very real criticisms that come from the East, from the Orthodox, that are valid, and it transcends the theological or the spiritual. I mean, it's deeply rooted in that. That's sort of where all this springs from. But there's these deep sort of like aftershocks in all other areas of the culture that they had their start within the spiritual ethos of the West. And there are people that are a lot smarter than me that are really good at breaking this down. And to be frank, there's a lot of stuff out there now about this. So I'm not going to go into it. You just a cursory jaunt through YouTube, and you can find someone like Jay Dyer who's been talking about this for literally years. And
Yes.
You can find probably hundreds of hours of him educating you on this. So I'm not going to do that. He does a better job of that than I do anyway. But yeah, so this culture of like embracing some consumer identity, there are people who have used this psychosis, I guess you could say, in a productive way to bring people to the Orthodox Church. Death to the World is a really good example. I don't think Father John intended that. In fact, I know he didn't. But Death to the World is a good example of taking something that is sort of wrapped in the trappings of punk rock and pop culture and has this really cool, like dark vibe, edgy,
Yes.
you know, counterculture vibe.
Yeah,
All those
I
words,
love Death to the World. I think it's awesome.
all those words, by the way, make my skin crawl. Counterculture. Oh, but I got to use it because what else do we say, right?
Right, right.
Yeah, they, I should say, have taken that and utilized this urge, this impulse to identify with a consumer culture, and have taken that and used it to sort of direct people into the Orthodox Church, where you're cleansed of that if you're doing it right. The problem that I'm starting to see, it's not a problem. I don't want to say it that way because I'm not an authority. I don't want to say it's a problem. Like, I don't mean it that way. I just mean something that I've noticed that has the potential to become an issue for some people, is to stay in that place.
Mm-hmm.
And you see this a lot with like the ortho bro thing. You know, I'm a little too old for that.
Yeah.
But Orthodoxy isn't this cudgel that you can use to BTFO people on Twitter. It's not a tribe that an internet tribe that you can adhere to be based, or to, you know, that's just not what it is. It is that for some people, but you're missing the point. That's like going to the most lavish buffet. You're starving. You haven't eaten in 3 weeks. You are blessed with the ability to go to this lavish feast of any food you want in the world, and it's an unlimited amount. And instead of eating it, you go in and you sit in the waiting area and text your friend that you're at a banquet. You know, like, it's cool. Like, I'm full, I'm at the banquet, you know, or like, I'm here. It's like, no, you need to just put all that aside eventually and go in there and partake of what's there. And I mean, again, not a great analogy, but I can't really think of any analogy.
It is actually. I mean, I think it is a good analogy because there's something about that there's something about our culture that is exceptionally superficial,
right?
You know, and it's like the photograph of you at the church is in some ways, you know, you signaling on social media, because we are in such like a narcissistic, such a narcissistic culture. It's like, instead of you going to Santorini and taking a picture of yourself out there, like, oh, look, living my best life, you're taking a picture of yourself at a church, where what you really should be doing is putting that phone away, and being a part of the liturgy and sticking around and being a part of the group, and also putting those things aside to allow the church to change you the way it's supposed to.
Right.
And I do totally agree with you. I see a lot of that especially in social media. The rise of orthodoxy is both excellent and also slightly concerning, even for myself. Like, I feel it in myself too. Like, you know, I'm started this project this year. I don't want to be some Instagram person. I don't want to be some celebrity or anything.
An influencer.
I will never refer to myself as an influencer.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
No,
but at the same time, I do think it's important, because I've done plenty of wrong in my life, to try to do something, especially nowadays when everything is so insane, to try to say something that's right and that's good, and be a part of that if I can be. But really what I'm going to church to do is to try to help myself, you know, to try to change myself for the better, and allow it to do what I know it needs to do, because I need it. I wouldn't be here if I didn't need it. You know, like, I wouldn't be going to church, you know, and trying to get away from my worst habits to, you know, I don't want to wear it like a skin. I don't want to wear orthodoxy like a coat and then take it off when I come home, you know? And I do definitely agree with you. I see that as being kind of an issue for some people, especially young folks who that's all they know. All they know is social media and Instagram, and that they've been raised in. And I was fortunate enough to be, I'm only like 2 years younger than you. So, you know, I remember the world before the internet, right? I was like almost like teenage years before the internet happened, but there definitely are a lot of people who don't have that luxury, and they're just steeped in this culture we're in.
I remember when the T-Mobile Sidekick was like holding a time machine. Remember that thing?
I do.
Oh, I'll never forget. A buddy of mine had one, and I'm like, oh my gosh. But anyway, yeah, I know. I 100%. And I don't want to. When I bring up the ortho bro thing, I'm not attacking any of those guys.
Right. No, because I know some guys who consider themselves ortho bros, and like I know I'm ortho bro in some people's cell phones. Like I know that that's the case, and I love those guys, and I hope for the best for them. But I can't argue that I definitely think it could be an issue.
No, and it's not a like the other end of that is like people who, well, I've been Orthodox this long, like it's a role game. Like I have this many HP now because I've been Orthodox. It's like, it's not a role playing game either. You know what I mean? But at the same time, I have seen like, there's been waves of conversion. Like right now, more than ever before, there's this massive influx of converts. And it's just it's sort of this, I don't want to say perfect storm culturally, but it kind of is. I mean, there are all these other church, these sects, these Christian sects with the T, is they're collapsing, and the Roman Catholic Church is collapsing in a lot of ways. And you had, the beer bug, or however you want to say, I don't want to say it on here.
The naughty word.
Yeah, the bad word with the bad medicine. Yeah, there's all of these things that are happening, and they're causing people to question everything. And so I totally understand, and I'm thankful that there's all these people coming into the church. But I said something on Twitter that got a lot of negative comments from these orthobro type dudes, or men and women, I don't know, they're all anonymous, but not all of them, but several of them. And it was very combative, because I wasn't being combative. I was just saying like, hey, I forget what it was, but I'll distill what I said. I was like, if you're going to come into the Orthodox Church, that's fine, but we don't want your baggage. We all bring baggage with us, but this is a little bit different. There's baggage there's a different kind of baggage being drug into the church that is oozing with the toxicity of all of the nonsense going on outside of the church. And that's always happened. But the reason why we need to be extra watchful inside the church right now is because it's a large number of people. It's not just a trickle. It's a large number of people coming to the church. And this idea that, well, the doors are open. No. Orthodoxy costs something. And it's my opinion that we should go back to a 3-year catechumenate, at least a year or more, but a 3-year catechumenate. I think you should be a catechumen for 3 years. That's just my personal opinion. One of the parishes I attend, it's a couple hours away from here. It's my favorite parish in the area. The priest, when he says catechumens depart, he makes the catechumens depart.
Wow.
They go out.
I actually did that. I did. And then some guy came out and he's like, you can come back in, you can come back in. No, it's okay. But I mean, I agree with you. I totally agree. Cause
it's not to be a jerk or be like,
for myself, like I sometimes feel like I'm in fast forward on this. Like, I'm like, maybe I haven't been doing this long enough to be at the point that I'm at. Like, I'm still dealing with plenty of issues, and I appreciate my priest and I appreciate everybody there. And I want to be a part of it as much as I can. I want to go all in. Yeah. But at the same time, like, I do feel like it's kind of a bit fast forward. Like I need to process, like I still need to process a lot of my bad habits and bad behaviors. And I still need to know more. Like I want to learn more. But I don't know if there's ever any point where I'm going to be ready, quote unquote. I'm just,
No, one of the things that I've noticed, and if you talk to anybody that's been like, I think it was Metropolitan Herotheos Vlachos said that it takes, if you're coming from the West into the Orthodox Church, it takes a minimum of a decade to even begin to become Orthodox. It takes, you can be Orthodox and be baptized or whatever, but it takes at least a decade. to even begin to acquire an Orthodox mind. Now, when you talk about an Orthodox mind or phronema or all the, these are things that people throw around and concepts that people throw around. And I think a lot of the people that are talking about this subject need to not be talking about it at all. Like I think this is an area that a lot of the people talking about it don't have this phronema,
That's why this particular project that I've started is an interview project. I don't want to be up here preaching about Orthodoxy. I have no authority to do that. I'm trying to learn and I'm trying to bring that to others. But yeah,
be like a faucet, like a conduit to.
If I can do that, that's great. That's the whole
good.
point of this project. Because I don't know enough to be preaching these things as much as I may want to. Like, I would love to know enough and to be that person. I know that you can't go from 0 to 100 and just be able to do it.
No,
please.
Oh, I was going to say I'm not trying to rag on that internet, the Orthodox internet thing, like the Ortho Bro, because there's a lot of positives there too. I will say though that the reason why I brought this stuff up before is because it's out of a place of genuine concern, like deeply concerned. Like, I genuinely am concerned because a lot of these guys are young, and when the longer you're Orthodox, the more you realize that Orthodoxy, living as an Orthodox Christian, is a lot more boring than what you see on the internet or see in these videos, or like, if you're doing it the way you're supposed to, it's not. And by boring, I don't mean that with any negativity. I just mean it's very mundane, and it really, really does require a marathon-like commitment where you steadily go. And I fail at that constantly. I mean, I take the easy way out all the time. But the longer you stay in the church, the more you realize that with the length of time you stay in the church, and the more you go to the services, and the more you do the church literally spells out down to what you're supposed to do each day. Like it's do these things. And I mean, it's simpler than that, and it's more complicated than that. I'm not a elder spiritual father, so I'm not going to give anybody guidance on that by any means. But my main concern with the whole internet orthodoxy thing isn't necessarily the negative, they're mean to people. Like, I think, who cares? Everybody's mean to people on the internet. Like, grow up. That's just how it is. Maybe we shouldn't be, but for example, Jay Dyer gets a lot of grief because of the way he interacts with people. And there was a period of time where I was a little, I would consider Jay an acquaintance, outside of we're not friends by any means. I don't hang out with him all the time, but he's definitely somebody that I would consider a casual acquaintance. And there was a period of time where I had an issue with the way that he did some things. And then I changed my mind on that. And it clicked what he's doing. And I think he's matured a lot too. I mean, everybody changes or whatever. Yeah. What Jay is doing is really important. And I'm not fanboying at all. That's not what I'm doing. He definitely doesn't need my help. But what he is doing is, and there are other people doing this too. Like Mike Whitkoff, or Brother Augustine. I mean, there's that core group of people, for lack of a better term, Orthodox e-celebs on YouTube that are doing their thing. Father Deacon Ananias. They're doing good stuff. They're filling this void, and they're sort of fishing in a pond for people that I don't think would be caught by any other media apostolate or these aren't people that are going to be listening to Ancient Faith Radio. These aren't people who might even darken the door of an Orthodox church. And so I changed my mind on Jay's approach and what he's doing, not necessarily his content. I don't buy into half of the stuff. I don't even care about a lot of the stuff he talks about, but he's fishing in a different pond, and he's performing a service for the church that I think is vitally important in the modern era that we live in. He needs to be the way he is, because he's not dealing with people like, you can't be this Pollyanna, like, I'm just going to kill him with kindness. Yes, you can in your personal life, but if you're doing a specific job where you're engaging people rhetorically who are not just against let alone the Orthodox Church, but Christianity, they're hostile to it, and they're attacking it very proactively. You need someone, even if it's just on the internet, on YouTube, whatever, you need people that are willing to fight fire with fire. Maybe that's not a popular opinion, but
I think you're right.
I respect what he's doing. I wouldn't say that it's not for everybody. You have to have a certain something to be able to do that. And I think he's doing, and honestly, the proof is in the pudding. A lot of people, he has had a dramatic impact on the level of converts that are coming to the church right now. That being said, a lot of these people are younger, or even the ones that aren't younger. A lot of them need to realize that when it becomes boring, when it becomes mundane, you need to have embraced the obedience necessary to stick with it, because inevitably it's not going to be exciting forever in that way. There's going to come a time where you don't want to go to liturgy. You don't want to deal with this. You don't want to do your prayer rule or whatever. That's going to happen. You're going to have read all of these books about elder whoever, and there comes a point and you realize, okay, was I hyper fixating on, or did I miss the Christianity by focusing on the Orthodoxy? Because that's a real thing too. It's about Christ. Okay, and if we lose focus of that, for example, like I never really appreciated Father Thomas Hopko years and years ago when I was a catechumen or just coming into the church. I didn't appreciate him like I do now, or even like Father Alexander Schmidt. Obviously everyone, whenever you bring either of those guys up, there's always somebody like, well, actually, and it's usually some kid who's like not baptized yet, or, just whatever. It's usually people that whatever. But anyway, I appreciate him immensely now. He's probably one of my favorite contemporary popular voices. And he has a series he did for, I think it's Protecting Veil, that
yes,
channel. Yeah, he does awesome stuff too. And he has two videos. They're about 15 minutes a piece, and it's advice for beginners, advice for new converts, or whatever. That is the best information. That's what I send to people who are inquirers or catechumens. That is the best information and most practical that I've ever seen from any priest ever. And it boils down to, I'm not going to ruin it. Just go watch it. You can search it out. Father Thomas Hopko, Protecting Veil, Advice for Beginners. And when you watch it, like now I can look at it and go, oh my God, it's so simple. But it wasn't, forgive the term, but it wasn't sexy. It wasn't like something that I was like, oh, this is exotic, because it's like, it's, hey, are you reading the Bible? You shouldn't be reading any of these other spiritual books unless that's the first thing you're reading, And if you look at it, like what did Saint Seraphim of Sarov say? He says that all of this stuff that Father Thomas Hopko was talking about in this video is stuff that you would get the same advice from Saint Theophane the Recluse, Elder Ambrose of Optina, like you name it. This is basic stuff. But I feel like some of the people that are being drawn to Orthodoxy are being drawn to it because they want some type of they don't call it a consumer identity, but they want some kind of an identity.
Yeah. And
there's a lot of people that becomes an avenue for them to get to the church. And then, it's not always a bad thing. A Death to the World does that. Great. They bring you in that way unintentionally. And then you start to see the wealth of what's there. And that becomes a peripheral thing. But there are quite a few people who aren't going to be around in the next few years because something will happen, or they'll end up old calendarists in some like fringe group. You know, they'll end up somewhere that is the church, and they'll miss out. And so when I'm being critical, I'm not saying ortho bros and they're mean to people and I don't think that's okay. Like, that's not it at all. It's that a decent chunk of these people need to be aware, and they just need to be on guard and not miss out by being so focused on the stupidity of the internet culture part of it, to where they miss out on what's actually going on. They miss out on Christ and the fundamental reality of what's there. And I feel like, I don't know, I feel like I can say this stuff because I've personally done that in a lot of ways. Yeah. I've been there and done that, and by the grace of God, it didn't totally, I'm still here, you know, but yeah, I mean, so anyway, yeah, there's good and bad. One of the things I love the most about all the ortho bro thing is the fact that a lot of those guys, a lot of the guys that are drawn to that have found something, and something honest, and something that's not really, something that's not toxic, you know, like there's toxic elements of it, but I don't know. It's just nice. It's nice to see that there are people who, for example, I said this on another podcast I just did a couple weeks ago. I was very connected. I don't mean like formally, like I wasn't a person involved in like these groups or anything, but I was very enthusiastic and a respecter of the alt-right back in like 2013, 14, before it became the caricature and was demonized as this everything I don't like is,
that's how I got here. Yeah.
Uncle Adolf, you know, that whole thing. Like, I was definitely a consumer of a lot of that content, and I was Jonathan Bowden completely and utterly, when I say changed my life, I mean, that's being a little dramatic, but Jonathan Bowden, listening to his incredible speeches, hearing the things he was saying, it distilled and gave me permission to embrace some of the ideas that I'd always had as a rando guy growing up in America. These, I don't know how to explain it, not impulses, but like things I'd thought about the world, and hearing Jonathan Bowden enunciate them and point them out without me feeling bad about it. Now, not everything. He was kind of a Fruit Loop Nietzschean pagan, whatever. Like, sure, I'm not one of those people, obviously, but that whole sphere was very formative for me. And then, of course, it became a sideshow and literal, you know, Wignat, White, you know, it became this thing that anyone who, you just didn't want to be associated with it. Yeah. And you can't be an Orthodox Christian and adhere to an ideology. You have to be Orthodox. You can't be, I'm a Orthodox Christian who's also this. Like, that's, no, you're embracing ideology. You can't do that. So, but anyway, that was very formative for me. So it's interesting to see a lot of young men from that, or that were maybe influenced by the shockwaves from that years later, and what became the dissident right wing. And that's, I mean, there's such a wide umbrella. You have these like libertarian types, these NRX, I don't know, whatever these ideologies these people are, this loose collective. I think now that the dust has settled, and a lot of these like clownish people who were the face of the alt-right or whatever have sort of drifted off into obscurity or changed or disassociated from that. Mm-hmm. You see a lot of really interesting things intellectually going on with that currently with the dissident right wing, but I digress. Anyway, a lot of young men who would fall under that umbrella are becoming Orthodox. And by young men, I quite literally mean young men, like 15, 16, 17, all the way up to whatever, mid-30s, early 30s. And when I was really plugged into all the old alt-right, there was no spiritual, it was all ideology. It was very utopian,
Yes.
but there wasn't a defined brand of utopianism that anyone really wanted to adhere to. It was this vague embrace of race and ethnicity, as if no one's ever done this before, like this time it'll turn out different. So anyway, it's nice to see that there was some like article written by some idiot about why is the Orthodox Church drawing in evil right wingers, or one of these stupid blogs with one of these like mouth breathing, terminally liberal, whoever. And it's like, well, it's not this big conspiracy. And if you have half a brain, you can see why anyone who would be vaguely interested in dissident politics would be drawn to the Orthodox Church, because it's my opinion that dissident, what you would call right-wing political ideas, are simply just an embrace of reality.
Absolutely, because I never considered myself any of those things as I was going through it. I just knew that the mainstream, what I was being told by mainstream media, growing up in a secular environment, going to school, going to college, and living in the real world, like they just didn't line up.
Right.
Reality, you can't believe a whole bunch of nonsense and then bang up against reality and have it not make you go, maybe my presuppositions were wrong. Like, why is all of this stuff not working out in reality? And it ultimately leads you looking for what's true. Right. And what's true leads you to the right and to the dissident right. It's just, you're absolutely right. It's all of the alt-right, especially in like 2012, 2013, I think, when I first kind of started trying to figure out why everything was going insane in America. They were the people who were really pointing out the real issues. And I wouldn't be Orthodox now if I hadn't started going through that. No, absolutely.
And it's many such cases that I can't tell you how many people I've heard this from. It's just the reason why a lot of people end up Orthodox is because it's true.
That's it. That's it.
There's no like conspiracy. There's none of that. There's no like overarching Freudian whatever for why. It's just simply true. And generally people who, I forget this entire concept of and when I say dissident right, I mean that generally like this, there's a very big envelope or whatever, big umbrella that you can cast over that net. And he's got a YouTube channel, Pete Quinones. I know he said his name wrong.
Oh yeah, I think I've seen him on Twitter.
He's awesome. He's like a former libertarian. He's like a cynical libertarian, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, I've really been listening to a lot of his stuff recently, and he did a live stream a couple days ago, and he touched on this a little bit about how this isn't the right wing or the dissident right or whatever isn't some ideology that is a bunch of people got together and cooked up this ideology, or they've dissected all of this other, this is like fourth wave Heideggerian, like there is some of that. I mean, you have people that do that, like Michael Millerman is great at that, and he's not like full crap. Like he actually can engage you with that stuff. I'm not that way, and I'm not really speaking about the more academic stuff. I just mean experientially, anyone who finds themselves on the right wing, as far as it's defined nowadays, is just someone who refuses to believe the lie.
Yes.
And by the lie, I mean quite literally, in a macro sense, we live in, an empire of lies. Yeah. So
Yes, sir.
we live in an empire of lies, and so anyone that wakes up to that realization and is also seeking truth in maybe a metaphysical sense, or speaking some kind of, or excuse me, is seeking some kind of spiritual truth, generally will end up, if they're investigating Christianity, they'll usually end up Catholic or Orthodox. Okay, and very serious people end up Catholic, and they end up Catholic for a multitude of reasons. But I found that the ones that end up Orthodox are usually, like I said, to connect it to what I said earlier about I had this deep desire to embrace truth, no matter what it cost, and no matter how ugly it was, no matter if it really was just an abyss and this is all pointless. I want to know, like I said earlier, even if it was that staring into the mouth of insanity because there's nothing, this is all meaningless, and this cacophony of craziness, and why am I here, and blah, blah, blah. Even if that's what it is, I want to know that, why would that be an impulse that I would have unless that's put there by God? And anyone who goes down that road that's seeking for that overarching why, an answer to that, and they're looking into Christianity, I don't know. I found that the people that embrace Orthodoxy are the ones who are the most hardcore about that. And people who identify more with dissident political ideas, they're tend to going to want to go towards Orthodoxy because it's, and not just because it's true. I said that in kind of a flippant way. It's true. Mic drop. I didn't mean it in that way. I kind of did, I guess, but I don't know. I found that the people who don't just convert because they've read a history book and they like the liturgy, people who end up there also because it's an intellectual thing or political thing, it's born of a deep dissatisfaction. So if you read about in the life of Father Seraphim Rose, part of the reason, and I didn't want to say this earlier because I didn't know if we were going to get into this kind of stuff, so I was kind of feeling you out to see, but Father Seraphim, in his biography, he talks about encountering these perennialist philosophers who, I'm not going to sit and pretend like I've read a bunch of Evola or whatever. I read some Evola. But
I think I have his Revolt Against the Modern World up there on my bookshelf.
Yeah. Revolt's pretty good. Honestly, it wasn't very memorable. I got more out of reading Ted Kaczynski, to be honest, than I did Evola, but
got that too.
I'm a big Kaczynski fan, but of his writings.
Maybe his praxis,
I don't support his actions unless
well, what's so crazy about that is when I read it, because you have this caricature of him, and right. Even when, we're roughly the same age, so I'm sure you saw him lampooned. He was lampooned throughout SNL and all of these different sketch comedy shows, and it happened in the media. And then I read his writing, and it was like, oh my God, like he is so spot on. Like this crazy person. I don't advocate hurting people. That's ridiculous. Right. But he was so accurate in how he described the state of things that it was almost like it gave me kind of like chills reading it. Yeah. And it was in the 90s, and I'm reading it in like 2013 or something, and it was just so prescient.
100%. He was, he really sort of encapsulated, I don't want to say prophetic, but he was in a lot of ways, but he really hit the nail on the head. There's no way I can talk about it without sounding like an idiot, because when I feel like when I don't talk about Ted Kaczynski and his writings much because I feel inadequate talking about it. Not that I worship him like some academic, like some god or something like that. I just feel like anything like that, I always feel like I just sound like such a pretentious dweeb talking about, those kind of ideas, because most of it is stuff that I've imbibed secondhand, and oh gosh, what's his name? Oh, Decline of the West. I can't believe Spengler.
Oh, Spengler. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he's one that I tried to dig into, but I barely have time to read like spiritual writings. So anything I know about Spengler, I've gotten secondhand from people who have dug into Spengler, which is okay, you know. But with Kaczynski, I actually, you know, I read his manifesto.
Yeah.
And yeah, when you read that, like if you were to give that to somebody and not say it's Ted Kaczynski, they would go, wow.
Yeah.
This is incredible. Totally 100%. When was this written? And then you tell them, and then you say, oh, by the way, that was the Unabomber. oh, well. You know, they have this like weird connection, like, well, he's just like David Koresh. You know, like there's this like this all-star team of wackos that we took out, or that the US government sort of took out during that general time period. And rightly so. Some of them were legitimately like killing and hurting people. So, I mean, whatever. But at the same time, if you dig beneath the surface, I don't want to say I excuse it, because I don't, but you can definitely understand the thought process, I guess, even if it was a little wacky. So I don't know if that says negative things about me. Like if I'm like, yes, I understand exactly what you're saying. Now I'm on a list. I'm probably already on a list somewhere in Langley, but
man, yeah, because I went through all of that. You know, I went to I lived in California. I went to art school in California. I worked in the tech field. I've been working in the tech and the entertainment industry for almost 20 years now. And I've encountered that to be very accurate to living in that world. Like he spells out the over socialized person so accurately.
Isn't that crazy?
Insane. I think he wrote in 93, 96, something like that. And yeah, it blows my mind. And yet it's accurate to reality.
Yeah. Yeah. And the whole point of bringing this up was when I read Father Seraphim Rose's biography, and he mentioned these perennialist philosophers and how he talked about, he was trying to find this like tradition where he could be above all traditions, and how he realized that is just like the most arrogant, condescending way of viewing anything, let alone these traditions that he found, you know. And yeah, reading that some of these names, or you know, a couple of these names that I have a brief familiarity with, that were connected to this sort of taboo right-wing political ideologies that I've been, I guess, dipping my toes in or trying to understand. That's one of the reasons why it spoke to me, Orthodoxy. And I think one of the reasons why Father Seraphim Rose is such a powerful, influential person, even today, almost 40 years after his repose. And I think he'll continue to be. In fact, I think he's going to become even more influential, and God willing, if he is canonized, even more so. And one of the main reasons is like what you said. You were talking about you lived in Southern California, whatever, and you worked in the entertainment industry and all that. And I come from the tattoo industry, and I think a lot of young men specifically. I mean, with young women, it's different. It's the same, but it's different. They sort of have a different set of specifics, but it's a similar experience where you find yourself, you jump into this degenerate pool that we call modernity, and there's all these little things and ways of living and things that people do, and you just assume that that's reality, or that's living life. And as I was saying earlier, when we view the world through these like consumer identities, and we can't not view the world that way, that sort of has something to do with this, because one of the things that I've been trying to do, I've not been successful, but I've been really trying hard to find a way to deprogram myself from seeing the world as a modern person. And this is like, I mean, this is something that a lot of people, especially on the internet, that do what we're doing and talk to each other and navel gaze about philosophy and what's wrong with the West and all that stuff, I mean, people talk about this stuff all day, every day, and which is good. But one of the things I think that people talk about, but I haven't really found anybody that's found a legitimate way to do this without completely unplugging from the matrix and going to live on a homestead, completely self-sufficient, is to try and view the world, maybe not like an idealized pre-modern world, but trying to engage with reality without participating in this consumerist psychosis. And I don't know if that's possible. That's like saying, I want to play Call of Duty, but I don't want to turn on the Xbox. It's like, how do you do that? Can you? Is it possible? Like, how do I get on and say the gamer word without having my headset on? You know what I mean? Like, how do you do this? And I don't think that that's something that I haven't found a solution to it, because I want to. I have 5 kids, I'm married, and me and my wife talk about it all the time. Like all this stuff about Disney and the groomer, grooming.
Oh man, it's terrible.
It's horrible. I have 5 kids, and Disney Plus is there's the utility that Disney Plus has in our life is profoundly important, because there's these films that my kids love that, I'll be honest, with 5 kids, one of my kids has autism too. We use that and their tablets as a tool in order to de-escalate situations and to give them something to do. Like, so what do? Do we become Luddites and completely take all this stuff away? No, because if you've ever been around, and this isn't all kids who are like homeschooled and totally like sheltered from reality or the world or whatever. A lot of those kids, they go through a crazy phase where they cut loose and they're wilding out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And me and my wife decided, well, I don't want to, like, obviously I want to protect my kids from gnarly stuff and pornography and all the crap.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't want them to go out into this cesspool that is modernity and be totally blindsided by how Sodom and Gomorrah it is.
Yeah.
Like, I kind of want them to know what to expect, but to be prepared enough to make that right decision, or at least to be on the track to make those right decisions. And I think that so when I was speaking of like Disney Plus, all of us as Orthodox Christians have these things in our lives that we do that are, to one degree or another, are not in keeping with our convictions as far as how do we disconnect from this satanic system.
I think about this a lot, man. I'm not married and I don't have any children, but the thought of these things do cross my mind because, as I'm getting more serious, if I'm going to have a woman in my life, she's going to have to be my wife, right? I can't just be dating girls anymore, right? Can't be doing that. So that means that if I'm going to have a woman in my life, she's going to be my wife, and we're probably going to have children because it's how it goes.
That's how it works.
That's how it works, and how I have no idea how to handle some of those things, like I was already raised pretty well. Like, I love my parents. Like, I thank them for so much, but I don't think they even had a concept of how bad things were getting as I was being raised. I got into all sorts of stuff on the internet that I shouldn't have, and they probably had no clue about it.
Yeah.
And things have gotten so much worse. Mm-hmm. Like, it's actually kind of staggering to think about, like, when I was a kid, getting into something bad was just like some regular pornography you find in the woods, or like you could find it on IRC pretty easily if you were savvy. But that is like soft core compared to what is just commonplace and all over the place now outside of, the walls of my home.
Right.
It's shocking,
No.
And it's disconcerting too, because I don't, I agree. I wouldn't want to raise my children insulated from everything, like I want them to understand that something I think that I didn't appreciate growing up Roman Catholic was that the world was so very different than the experience I had in my family. Like, it didn't really, it was never really conveyed to me that we're actually a religious family, that the world is very different and you're going to run into like absurdly different points of view. I kind of took it all for granted. So when I hit it, when I hit it full force and I moved into, college and doing all these things, I was very susceptible to all of these different attacks, and I fell for it,
Right.
just because I never had these types of conversations. I didn't have a worldview that was formed to explain why things are wrong, who these people are, why we are different than why we're different than other people, like it was never consciously explained to me, So I think about this a lot. And then that was kind of tame compared to like sending a kid to California now.
Oh,
I would not want to do that.
no,
I would not want to do that.
I can't even imagine. Yeah, like so one of the, I mean, he's a popular saint because he's so amazing. Saint Porphyrios is one of my, I don't want to say favorite saint, but Saint Porphyrios, like whenever my inner atheist springs up and I start getting doubtful, or that little demon on my shoulder rears its ugly head, I just pull out one of my Saint Porphyrios books that I have about people's experiences with him, and that stuff usually goes away. Saint Porphyrios is amazing, and one of the things I like most about him is his very his nonchalant, almost spiritual advice. It's very simple. It's almost so simple that you'd be kind of pissed off if you went to him and he'd be like, what are you talking about? Yeah, and people have, like, that's what that, I remember a story, someone saying that they traveled and whatever, and he came out and gave his blessing, and they didn't even ask the question. He was a clairvoyant elder. The answer he gave was, tell them not to worry about it. And I mean that. You tell so-and-so not to worry about it. And if they do, it won't come to pass. It's literally all they said. And he was like, what are you talking about? You don't even know what I'm saying. And then he went on, and then whoever he was talking to, like his kid or whatever, he got advice for, it all clicked, and he realized, oh, I need to tell him this or whatever. So it's never like the advice that Saint Porphyrios gave was always very simple. His spirituality was very simple, And one of the things that's always stuck with me as a father is when he said, do not, and he means this in the context of if you have a kid that's out of control, or if you have a child who's on the wrong path. Or he didn't say do not. He said, it's more important to talk to God about your kids than it is to talk to your kids about God. Now, that doesn't mean you don't want to instruct your children in the faith. That's not what he's talking about. Mm-hmm. He's saying you're worried and you're trying to like cram them full of of orthodoxy, make them believe this and this and that. But what's more important is to bring them before God. In fact, I specifically think he was referring to the Theotokos. I'm almost positive that's what it was. He's had a couple quotes like this though, but it's very simple. It's like the first thing you should be doing if you've done your duty as a parent, which I can say I've failed in that aspect in a lot of ways. Coming to the faith as an adult and working it out for myself, and my wife's in a different place, like that's tough. And with kids, like trying to not just change your worldview, but also get your kids in line and teach them. It's not an excuse. It's very complicated. It's very difficult. So
yeah, absolutely.
But when I read that quote, or when I read St. Porphyrios talking about that, it made a lot of sense, and it gave me a little bit of peace, because it's like, you can, like what I said earlier about these, sheltered kids that go nuts, and the girls end up having an OnlyFans, and like that's, I don't want to say it's common, but it's kind of common.
It's pretty common. Yeah,
it's very common. I mean, we all know people like that, and so when he talks about that, that's really something simple that he said that stuck with me. That the first thing you should do, if you've at least done what you're supposed to do as a parent, or even if you haven't, you need to bring your kids before God and Theotokos and give them, to God, and not try to badger them into believing this or that. And so when I say I want to prepare my kids to make the right decision. I'm under no illusion that they're going to go out into the world, even if they're like the most saintly, most perfect Orthodox kids ever. I know that they're going to go out into the world and they're going to take some hits, and I know they're going to do things and take some artillery fire and, you know, whatever you want to say, and they're going to make bad decisions. But it's always been bad, but I feel like the stakes are a lot higher now. You know, when I was fooling around with drugs, you know, I took a lot of prescription painkillers a long time ago, and it was different because now you will die if you do that. You'll take fentanyl.
Yeah.
You will drop dead. I mean,
Yes.
It's almost guaranteed. If you play with that stuff, you're getting fentanyl. That's just how it is. So the stakes are just so much higher. Or if you're out messing around, like you decide you go to a party and mess around with some girl and make a mistake and have sex with some chick, well, there's always the possibility now that if she changes her mind, you're going to be charged with rape. I mean, there's all these like, I mean, that's unlikely, but it's maybe not.
You say it's unlikely, but we hear stories about it all the time. It's absolutely true.
So the stakes are higher, and I think there's a lot of craziness going on. And my main concern is, has that seed been planted enough or whatever, so that it'll grow? And I guess as a parent, the toughest thing is I can't make them believe something.
Yeah.
I can't force them to do these certain things, or not just do things, but value what I value. I can't really force it. And that's challenging as a parent because, you know, you love your kids and the deck is stacked against you. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how to unplug from all of this. I simply don't. We were talking about Twitter and stuff earlier or whatever, and I hate the fact that I have to do what I have to do on Instagram. I mean, it's how I sell a lot of my art and iconography, but I have to do that. If I could get away from doing that, I would have a dumb phone. I'd have a flip phone. I totally would. I'm not just saying that to sound edgy. Like I would do that. Instagram is sort of a necessary evil. Social media in general is for the line of work that I do with iconography or whatever too, to stay connected with people. But I don't have an answer, and I haven't really heard anyone with a coherent answer to any of this stuff. So I think, I don't know. I don't know. It's not just a scary time. Like, I don't know if you believe in, I don't want to say the Kali Yuga or whatever, but I don't know if some people call it the fourth turning, or there's all these ideas. I think that everyone in the world, or at least in Western civilization, knows, and it transcends their intellect. They know on a visceral level that things are coming to a head. Mm-hmm. And we're headed for a major change and a painful one.
Yes.
And I don't know. And it's frustrating because you don't know how to prepare. Like I said, you don't know how to unplug from the system, but also thrive in it and survive in it. You know, I don't know.
Well, I think that's actually quite a good way to get the conversation towards your iconography, because, you know, having a room full of paintings, you have your cross, you have your lantern, you got all these, beautiful icons behind you. You're filling your home with the imagery. Like your children can't not see it if they come in to check out what dad's painting, right. You know? So how did you wind up moving into iconography? Like you said originally, I recall earlier, one of your comments was, you kind of saw the art and you thought it was a little weird. Like it wasn't initially like something that drew you in. Cause I know a lot of artists, they get drawn in through the iconography. Yeah. And that was partly how I got drawn in, looking at this wealth of art that goes back to the very beginning.
Right.
So that was not your experience?
Not at all, to be honest. It was, obviously I saw it and it was interesting, mm-hmm. but it definitely wasn't the thing that piqued my interest initially. In fact, that was sort of that was sort of something that came a little bit later. I didn't just jump into painting either right off the bat. I waited a bit. And,
Yeah, I think I listened to an interview of yours from a bit ago where you were talking about how you wanted to do it right. Like you didn't want to dive in. And I've kind of had the same experience too as a sculptor and a painter. And, I'm a professional artist. Like I've made my living making art. So one of the baby steps for me, because I've been at this kind of like 8 years now, not Orthodox for 8 years, but from about the time I was 28, 29. Wow, that's actually like 11 years now. Anyway, time, right? When I started getting drawn towards Orthodoxy, one of the huge turning points for me was going to a retreat by Jonathan Peugeot, who I'm sure you know.
Mm-hmm.
I went to one of his carving classes, and it was a week-long class. We carved a beautiful icon, and I got to hear things from his perspective. I was already interested in his symbolic explanations of things. Jordan Peterson was coming on the scene. That's how I discovered Jonathan Peugeot. And he had just such a more, he had an orthodox view on so many things, opinions I've never heard before. And getting into iconography, like as an artist, like I kind of want to dive in, like I want to just make it. But then I realized, and I heard from you as well, which I'm kind of glad that I didn't do this, was that there's more to it than image making. Like it's something that you can't simply just do. And you shouldn't just do it also because you could be doing it quite wrong. And these are liturgical pieces of art. They're not just a pretty painting,
Right.
So what was your path into creating icons?
I don't know. It wasn't, it just became, it was just something I became interested in. And I'm when I get focused on something, I get like laser focused on it, and I do it until I become proficient at it. I think most artists are that way. It's not special. That's just, if you're a creative artist or whatever, that's just how you do it. It's how you learn. So as far as iconography goes, I'm predominantly self-taught. I do have, there are people that have helped me along the way, other iconographers that have given me information or helped me, but I've never really like formally had somebody I trained under or whatever. There's this really weird misunderstanding that a lot of people in the West have, that iconography is this like martial art or something, or like this, it's almost this like weird, I don't want to say a cult, but it's like, it's hyper esoteric to some people, and it's just not really the reality. Now you can train excuse me, you can train under someone and do all that. That's fine. That's how it's done in some countries, but you don't necessarily have to do that. That being said, part of the reason I was able to pick it up quickly and figure it out is because my secular job is tattooing, and I essentially had to back engineer art and do it as a tattoo. So I had to learn all these different styles of art or whatever. And so that really lent itself well to painting icons, because trying to figure out like, well, why is this color here? Or why is, I don't know if I have anything laying around or whatever. And nothing within arm's length. But anyway, I would sit at, when we were at the liturgy, and I would look at the icons and I would go, okay, well, why does this look this way? Or what, I wonder how this was done first. And there's a lot more stuff available now as far as instruction. Like none of that stuff was around when I first started painting. There wasn't videos on YouTube or any of that stuff. And I got some information from a Russian iconographer friend of mine. He helped me out a lot. And there's another professional iconographer that I know over in the Seattle area, and she invited me out to their house, and I spent an afternoon, and she kind of gave me some, a lesson here and there, or that day on kind of some basic stuff that helped. But I guess as far as getting into it, it just seemed like something there was no, the clouds didn't part, and I didn't really take it like serious in the fact that it wasn't like you would if you're a priest or something. I was just like, yeah, I'm an artist, and I feel like almost a duty, or that I should do this, or that maybe I could do this. The problem I had in the beginning was approaching it like it was like there was this way I had to do it. Like you have to do this step, and then this step, and then this, and if you don't do this, then it's a sacrilege, and God's going to be mad. And honestly, there's a lot of people who view it that way, and they teach it that way, and they approach it that way, and everything has some kind of hidden symbolic meaning and all that. And it's just, I mean, there is some of that, but a lot of that superstition that's been heaped onto it, and a lot of it is contemporary superstition that's been heaped onto it by Western converts. Not all of it, but a lot of it is. Some of the stuff I've brought up that I'd heard to a Serbian iconographer friend of mine, who's sort of my unofficial mentor's the wrong word, but he's helped me out a lot and given me a lot of fantastic information that I wouldn't have gotten any other way. He's definitely been a huge blessing, somebody that I can like call if I need help, or like right now I'm moving more into more like murals. It's not real fresco, but it's frescoes, you know. I'm moving more in that direction, and that's what he does. So it's helpful having somebody I can run something by, or hey, am I doing this right, or whatever. But some of these crazy things I've heard, I said to him, and he just would laugh, or be like, "Where did you hear that? Who said that?" Or, you know, like, I don't know. Yeah, people say, I've heard people say it's not a real. My favorite is always, it's not a real icon if blank. You know, it's not a real icon if, and then, you know, and that can be applied. I mean, there are instances where something is like, okay, that's not really an icon. But I've found that people that use that a lot, that call something not a real icon, or that use it in the way that they do, are generally just trying to look smart, or because you're an artist, you know, the art world is full of people who really want the world to know how smart they are, and how much they know about art, or how great of an artist they are. Like, artists have the worst issue with pride and building a monument to yourself, and you affix all of your self-worth upon this art you create. And so if you get any criticism, oh, they're an idiot, or, you know,
absolutely
it destroys your soul. And the thing with iconography is you have to find a way to disconnect from that and not do that. It's kind of impossible. I mean, I get critical, like on Instagram, people will, anytime I post an icon, I'll get some comment. It's any art in general, people love to, like, if you're doing anything at a professional level, or putting anything out there that people that see value in, you always get people who want to denigrate it. That's just how it is. Even if it's not iconography, there's always someone who gets intense glee out of like taking you down a peg, you know. And it is what it is. But I mean, as an iconographer, though, you have to find a way to separate yourself from that. And it can be challenging, but yeah, I mean, people ask me all the time, how do I get into iconography? How do I paint iconography? And the only advice I have is, well, that's like saying, you go, I want to buy a car. I'd like to purchase a car. Okay, well, what kind of car? Like, no specifics, I just need a car, you know. Or I want to eat a meal. Okay, well, what do you want? A meal, you know. It's a very vague question. And so it's hard for me to give a specific answer because everybody's in a different place. It's like, well, do you have a good foundation? Can you illustrate things? Can you, should you be painting iconography? Because there's people who want to that have no business with a brush in their hand, just like there's people who want to chant who can't carry a tune. And we each need to be doing the thing. We need to be multiplying the talents God has given us, and not digging up somebody else's talent to try and possess it as our own. Yeah. And so, and that could be anything. There's people who want to be clergy that shouldn't be priests, that haven't been blessed with that. Just like whatever. I mean, there's different jobs or whatever. And so with iconography, it's like, if you want to do it, you don't have to be doing it formally for the church and have a blessing from the bishop to have your icon. Like, you don't have to get that. You can just paint as a personal spiritual practice, or just because you want to, because you like it. God's not going to be mad at you if you paint an icon and it doesn't turn out right. Or if you didn't do it. There's all these different approaches and techniques and schools and styles and periods. When I say whenever I write anything about iconography or the tradition, like there's this misunderstanding. People talk about iconography like there's this set of rules and we have these canons. That's something I hear all the time, the canons of iconography. And it's like, okay, yes and no. There are canons, but there aren't canons. There's not this macro canon like this book of the canons of iconography. And if this has any sort of, if you use black, it's anathema. Like, that doesn't exist. That's not a real thing. But it's been misrepresented by some people as this very rigid thing. And I don't really understand it, because when you go into a Russian church, you're seeing iconography that adheres to the canonical tradition of the Russian Orthodox Church, whether that's, what is it, post-Petrine, whatever the academic term is, or academic, which is kind of a slight. It's kind of a jab. Oh, it's academic iconography. It's like, okay, I know what you're doing, and that's what you call it, but it's kind of a pejorative label, like it's very Western or whatever. But that is a legitimate tradition of iconography within the Orthodox Church, and there's icons that look like Baroque icons or Baroque paintings of the West that have myrrh pouring out of them in Russia. So you go to Greece, and there's very Byzantine-looking iconography that's canonical. Okay, this idea of canons being there's this rigid set of rules that it has to look exactly like this, or it's not considered a real icon, whatever that means. It's just, that's a myth that doesn't really exist. But there are local canons. There is a canonical tradition. It's the same when we have like or it's a similar mentality as to how a saint becomes a saint. Yes, there's a canonization process, but it's something organic that develops within the culture and the spiritual life of that specific part of the world or that specific community. And it develops within the boundaries of the greater macro tradition of the Orthodox faith. Okay, so it's almost like an onion, right? It's the same with iconography. It's the same with chant. It's the same with everything in the church. These are things that developed over time. If there's anybody that ever tells you that iconography was just God's hand came through the heavens and handed us Byzantine iconography, that's totally not true. It's the aesthetic of Byzantine iconography looks that way because it has its roots in the culture from whence Christianity sprung. And it was adopted and Christianized and developed over time. And it's developed, like I said earlier, within the tradition and the canonical tradition, spiritual tradition of the Orthodox Church, within the living theology of Orthodoxy. So this idea that there's these rules that if you don't follow these rules, you're going to get in trouble and it's not a real icon and God's going to be mad at you. That's a misunderstanding of what iconography really is. And frankly, it veers into idolatry in some way. So I'm very apprehensive to use that kind of language, I guess, in this capacity. But as far as, is there a right and a wrong way? Absolutely, because there are people who are painting icons that are just out of control, and they shouldn't. It's literally anathema. They shouldn't be doing that. But once again, it comes back to, like, where does creativity fall into it then? How do you exercise yourself as an artist? Or how do you embrace creativity as an iconographer? And I said this on a couple of the podcasts. That is something that is a tertiary thing. You're working within the tradition, the iconographic tradition that you are working in. I know that sounds kind of self-referential, but so if you are, for example, there's different schools and periods and areas of the Orthodox Church where they have their own very unique, specific aesthetic tradition. So if you go to, like, Novgorod, there's a very specific look to their icons, okay? Or, certain parts of Greece, they have very specific, Cretan iconography. I mean, you have Macedonian, you have all these different areas that have their own specific canonical tradition of iconography. And that came about because that's just what developed in their culture, and the outside and interior influences of Orthodoxy over a long period of time. Okay, so in America, we have the luxury of having the internet, and we have this sort of like obscene wealth of images all around us. Like, I have books, and I can get on the internet here on my iPad and look up pretty much any period or any iconographer, anything contemporary or from antiquity, and I can reference anything, right? I mean, I have a bunch of books here. I have, this history of icon painting, and it's got all these different, it's an obscene wealth of images.
Yeah.
And so the problem that we have is, how do we have an authentic iconographic tradition develop now within Orthodoxy? You have people like Photios Kontoglou, who, I don't agree with some of the things he wrote about the West and about Western art, but I understand why he wrote them. And I agree with the spirit of what he's saying in some capacity, because he was very critical of Western art. He was very, very critical of realism within iconography. Like, he viewed that as, anathema. He viewed it as something you're not supposed to do, because this idea that the icon is, the person depicted is transfigured. And that's a very real, that's a canonical tradition. However, there is also a tradition of realism. It's just something that naturally developed. And I'm of the, some people think that's heretical. I mean, there's people who literally take it to that extreme. I'm not. I don't think it's heretical at all. And that, I mean, that's a whole rabbit trail we could go down. I don't want to go down the road. I get a lot of criticism because I do some iconography that's more portrait-like or based, realistic. But yeah, so it's very complex. It's very simple, but it's very complex at the same time, because I don't know, people get tripped up. By telling you all that I just said, it's to illustrate that people get tripped up before they begin to paint, because they think they need to know all that, or they think that if they don't, it's good that they're approaching it with fear and trembling, and they want to do it because most people do it because they want to be reverent. It's the things of God. You want to approach, and that's a good attitude. But there comes a point where that almost becomes pathological, and it stops people who, in my opinion, otherwise should be contributing to the iconographic tradition in the West, and it stops them, or it greatly hinders their progress. And so I think we need to be raising up more iconographers in the States, so that we can cut the cord from the old country. Not that there's anything wrong with them. That's where we're getting our tradition. That's where we have a connection spiritually to all these countries where Orthodoxy came to our country from. But at some point, we need to have an American Orthodox Church when God sees fit. And we need to have American iconographers that are competent, not just who want to do it, who have the ability and who have devoted the time and energy and effort to perfecting it. Because what you want to give to the church should be not just the best you can do, but the people that are right for that job should be the ones doing that, because we need to be giving God our first fruits, our best, right? And I think oftentimes people are a little too timid to say, hey, maybe this isn't high enough quality, for lack of a better term, to be putting in a church. Okay, so by discouraging people who otherwise probably should be pursuing painting iconography by totally clouding the process or the learning process with all of this esoterica that's not really important when it comes to just the act of learning how to paint. I think it's doing a huge disservice to the Church of America. And I don't know if that's a big problem or that's a problem I created in my own mind because of my own experience, or I don't know, but yeah, I think it's something that needs to be addressed. So when the advice I give to people that ask me, how do I begin to paint iconography? I say, paint iconography. There's a lot of stuff out there. Just do it. You're not, if you're thinking, I don't want to do this wrong, I want to be respectful, then you have the right attitude. If you're the guy, like there's this Catholic priest who paints icons, he does like, it really makes me mad because he'll paint icons of like our saints, and then he'll do an icon of like Harvey Milk. If I showed you that, I can't stand what this guy's doing. And I don't know, I forget his name. I mean, you can probably say I'm visibly angry. When I see it, I want to spit on this stuff. I know I shouldn't say that, but it's like you're gonna paint a Harvey Milk icon and then have the balls to paint Saint Porphyrios or Saint Xenia of St. Petersburg. Like, you think that that's okay? But that comes down to the fact that, well, he's not Orthodox.
Yeah.
So maybe it's not a real icon. I don't know. But yeah, if you, there's no like qualifiers. Okay, there's no like, the only qualifier is like, well, can you draw? Even if you can't draw, like this is stuff that, like, I don't believe that you can hear my son in there, sorry. Art isn't a skill, or art isn't a talent, it's a skill. Some people have more of an aptitude, but anyone can learn to do competent art, in my opinion. You can teach anyone to oil paint realism, like you can quite literally, it's just a skill that if you focus on it, you can get to a proficient level. Now, there are people who exceed the abilities of others, obviously, but anyone can get to a level that is like, wow, that's nice looking,
Right on.
Because there's a science to it. I mean, just like anything, when you learn, if you go to an atelier or somewhere, an art school that's actually teaching like the fundamentals that they used to teach in art academies back before the modern art nonsense happened. They got fixated on creativity and everyone's an artist. Like before that period of like postmodern stupidity, around the time of like John, right when before the Impressionists got all crazy, and like the turn of the 20th century, when they were still teaching art in the atelier, and that was where you would go. That's kind of coming back around now, but all of those skills you can learn now. And as an iconographer, it's the same thing. Like, there's color recipes, there's all this technical stuff that if you get it under your feet and you learn that, you can then move on to learning Byzantine drawing. To me, that's like step number 2. For a long time, I've been trying to put together some instructional stuff. It's easier said than done. It's a full-time job. It's really difficult. I've made a couple videos. Like, I made a video. I didn't post it. I haven't posted it yet. I don't know why, but on like there's some instructional stuff out there, but they just gloss over like the most basic stuff that's like highly important. Like, you need to teach people how to get the paint off the brush, because that's a technique. Like, that's a really important, that's like if you've ever done like martial arts or anything, there's fundamental, like in jiu-jitsu, there, you do drills, you shrimping, like that's like the foundation of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, is trying to do an escape. Like, there's little stuff like that where if you don't teach people that, they're going to struggle and spin their wheels until somebody comes along and says, oh, this is a fundamental foundational thing that you weren't taught. And I think, there's a couple YouTube channels where they do iconography instruction or whatever. And some of it's good stuff. There's a couple of them though that are just like, it's just like, look what we can do. It's just someone it's just showing off or trying to get views or whatever. And this is why, and I'm not trying to call anybody out. I'm just saying, like, it's not really doing much for people as far as instruction. There's a lady, I forget her name, Julia Hayes, I think. I'm not a huge fan of her iconography or that style that like George Cordes, I think, is where she studied and that. It's very contemporary. I don't like that stuff, but she's a really good teacher, and she teaches them really, she's one of the only people doing instructional stuff that is actually teaching people usable foundational stuff. I don't use her approach, not my thing, but if you like that and that way, then she's doing, in my opinion, probably the best as far as instructional stuff goes. But this video I made was like, how do you get the paint off of the brush? Like, that's a specific, this dry brush technique with egg tempera. If you don't do this right, you're going to have a disaster. And if you can learn little stuff like that, it's just going to make the process of painting easier. So I think that's really important. And if you go to like Serbia or Russia and you study iconography, it's systematic. It's not like say 9 Jesus prayers and then that's not the focus at that stage. Okay. It's learning color theory, color mixing. I don't want to say color theory because that scares people. You know, the color theory, it's like it's really simple. It's not really, it's really mundane. It's not that complicated. But yeah, the technical stuff is what people need to learn. And so yeah, that's been something that I've wanted to do, but I mean, I still tattoo full time and I paint iconography full time. You know, so it's really difficult to do that. I will 100% be doing workshop, like in IRL workshops now that the COVID stuff's calmed down. I'm not sure where, but those are in the works or whatever. But I just tell people, if you want to paint. You don't have to use egg tempera. You can use acrylic. There's nothing wrong with acrylic, no matter whatever this person said online about it not being holy. I mean, you would not believe the stupid things that people say about iconography. It's just ridiculous. Anyway, yeah. And anyone that's watching this, if they're interested, you can send me a message. Any question you have about painting, I'll do my best to answer it. I might not get back to you for a week or two, or you might have to message me 9 times, but I'll help anybody with anything the best I can. But the best advice I can give is to just do it. As long as you have the attitude that you're unsure about whether you're going to do it right, you're going to make mistakes, and it's probably not going to look that great at first. But if you have that attitude that you don't want to flippantly go in and paint a Harvey Milk icon, then I think you'll be okay, you know? You don't need to learn all this historic stuff. It's good. You don't need to get all like hyper into the symbology. There are people that do that, and that's like Jonathan does that, and he's not like full of crap. You know what I mean? Like some of this stuff is a little like I don't get into it like he does. I'm more of just very straightforward with it. You know, but yeah, I mean, there's a way to go about it for everyone. But you need to ask yourself, should I be doing this? Do I have the foundational ability to do this? And if not, you can still paint an icon, but you need to be realistic about where your place is in the church if you want to serve God. Okay. It doesn't mean not to pursue it, but again, you should definitely pray about it beforehand, but don't approach it like, just chill. If you want to paint an icon, paint an icon. You know, just chill. One of the best ways to start out, if you want to start out with egg tempera is not, it's not this, people make it out to be this like, again, like it's a martial art. Like it's this like mystical thing and it's so difficult. It's really not. And I'm being facetious because I was really frustrated when I tried to figure this out, because this is the nonsense that I was getting from people. Not everyone, but a lot of people, like at the parish level and stuff, like, oh, well, egg tempera require you to become a master of egg tempera. And you hear all this nonsense, and it's like, it's just bogus. It's not that difficult. Especially with the internet, you can figure it out. What I do, I'll show you. When I do, so if I want to practice an egg tempera and I don't have a panel I want to mess up, or I mean, maybe not mess up, but I don't have because with the, right, find something to show you. With the panels used, well, this one has a drawing on it, but you'll see. So this is the type of panel that's used for iconography, and it's, I mean,
Right.
you can see it's like a work of art in itself. It's a handmade panel made out of, various types of different wood, linden wood or whatever. These are the braces in the back, whatever, and then there's this like divot frame, whatever, that's routed out. This is a, obviously when I started that I just barely started on, but yeah, if I want to like work out a color study, like I got some new colors I want to mess with, or I paint in a lot of different styles, schools of iconography. I paint Russian iconography, Macedonian. I'm all over the place. So if I'm trying to work out a different style or something like that, I paint an egg tempera, excuse me, egg tempera and acrylic. So, oh, watch all this fall over now. Hold on. So what I do, hopefully this doesn't fall over. So if I'm like right now I'm working on flexing my fresco muscles, because I have hopefully get this commission to do this church over on the west side. Anyway, but if I'm trying to work out, if I want to get an icon to look a certain way, like if I'm studying Panselenos or some iconographer and I want to have the look of my iconography to be a certain way, I buy these panels from Hobby Lobby or something. They're these like canvas panels, and I do stuff like that.
Right on, yeah.
These are just studies, and and these I sell these too for fairly inexpensive, and people can buy these for icons for their home if you frame it,
Yeah.
So I'll do stuff like that. You can do this. You don't have to have all the egg tempera set up. A lot of iconographers use acrylic, and there's nothing wrong with acrylic. Egg tempera in a panel icon does look better by like 10%, I would say. If you're using acrylic correctly and the right kind, if you're using the right kind of acrylic, here, let me set this here. You're not supposed to set an icon on the floor.
Oh yeah.
That's one thing that I am, serious about. But if you do that, see, that's acrylic. This, I'll show you one more acrylic. These are gonna fall. Hold on. Gosh. So yeah, this is acrylic right here.
That's beautiful.
Acrylic. So you can get a high quality egg tempera like look on with acrylic paint, of course. But you have to use the correct stuff. You can, but you shouldn't be using acrylic paint that you just buy at the art store in the tube. You can. There's a way to do that, but the ideal way is to use the same pigment that you're going to use with egg tempera, but instead of using egg yolk as your what's called your medium or your binder, you just use matte acrylic medium. And what I do is I use the powder pigment and I mix up the paint, it beforehand. So my red, I'll put the powder pigment and the acrylic medium together and mix it up. And so now I have my paint. Same deal. Like when you're doing big frescoes or murals or whatever, that's how you do it basically. So the same exact pigment that I use for my acrylic stuff, I also use for egg tempera. So it's the same powder pigment. It's just a different glue that's holding the paint to the panel. That's all. Gotcha. So and you definitely want to use higher quality acrylic medium. Lascaux is a great brand. It's the Swiss brand. It's the best. But if I'm going to be working in egg tempera and I want to work on a different look or something like that, I'll use illustration board or thick, like 300-pound hot press. It's really crucial. Hot press illustration or watercolor paper, and you can do stuff like that.
Oh wow!
You know what I mean? You can do it. You can paint egg tempera on thick watercolor paper, and it's a little different because on a panel, on a gessoed traditional panel, it's a little more challenging because you have to finesse it a little different. It's different. The paint will actually like lift up if you brush too hard. Whereas with watercolor paper, it's on there. So anybody that I've shown how to paint, whatever, if you're doing egg tempera, I always start them on this because the the more variables that are going to be frustrating that you take out of it, you can focus in on learning certain aspects and then reintroduce these frustrating variables as you go, as you master one thing. So it's not this like avalanche of frustration, like, why is the paint coming up? And there's too much, a glob of paint on my brush, and I have streaks of white pigment. Like, there's all of these technical things that if you can reduce the frustration, I found that people, you know, they progress rapidly. So it's just like anything, it's just like any other skill or whatever, you know, if you learn how to do it sequentially and learn these foundational technical techniques, it just makes the whole process a lot more enjoyable. So that aspect of it is really important. And you don't have to be this like extremely talented illustrator or whatever to do it. You don't have to really, you have to have a little bit of artistic ability, but if you're just going to paint as a hobby or something you want to do to paint icons for your own home, whatever, like, you don't need to go out and try and get this bishop's blessing and paint all the iconostasis. You don't have to do that. So there's a place for everybody to get into this, and if you're interested in it. So yeah, I mean, that's usually where I start people to egg temper, but don't be afraid to do the acrylic thing. It's the same, it's functionally the same technique with the brush and all that stuff too. Again, it's just a different set of challenges. So I don't know, kind of a long-winded way of introduction, but
No, that's great, man. Is your Instagram the best place for people to find the examples of your iconography, or do you have a website?
I do have a website. I've been saying this for like a month. It's I transferred over to it's this artist. It's hard to explain. It's an artist website. It's a company that just does websites for artists, and I've been having difficulties with the e-commerce stuff. So I'm almost done figuring that out. It's just a nightmare right now. But yeah, ShayneSwenson.com is just my website. But if you want to just look at art and iconography, Shayne Swenson Icons on Instagram, pretty easy to find. So, and I have a Facebook account, Shayne Swenson Icons. No more Twitter, fortunately, but
No more Twitter. Yeah, that's probably for the best.
yeah.
Well, Shayne, you know, I've had you for a while. I want to thank you very much for your time.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, and we've gone over quite a few different things tonight. So thank you so much, man. And glory to God for all things.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.